Order. Can I welcome our two witnesses to this session about Kids Company? And could I first of all ask each of our witnesses to identify themselves for the record?
Shall I start?
Yes, good idea.
My name's Alan Yentrob. I was the chair of Kids Company. I'm also the creative director of the BBC.
I'm Camilla Backman-Gelage. I'm the founder of Kids Company.
Thank you. And we're going to try and ask short and concise questions, and it would help us greatly if you would give short and concise answers. And if I feel you're going on a bit too long, I will pull you up. But that's simply so that we can get through all the questions that we want to ask, and it would help us greatly if we could be short and concise. The objective of this session is not to conduct a show trial. We want to learn some lessons. We want to learn about what your charity was actually doing, whether the model it adopted was in some way flawed, or what the challenges it presented to the trustees and the leaders of that charity, what we can learn about the governance of charities, what the Charities Commission might learn about how to conduct its regulatory role, and how government might be more effective and in how it handles support for charities doing whatever work they do. Could I start by asking you to explain exactly what Kids Company did and how it did it?
Kids Company supported some 36,000 clients a year with a range of services. And where we had clients with less serious risks, we supported them through volunteering and gifts in kind. The clients who were costing us the most money were the ones with extreme risk, who should have never in the first place been in the care of Kids Company. They were statutory responsibility, really. And that client group over the years was increasing. And what we did is, in effect, we had a fusion of social care and mental health and poverty intervention. So we had psychiatrists, psychologists, we had psychiatric nurses, we had social workers, teachers, artists and musicians, and we wrapped around the vulnerable individual a package of care in order to enhance their resilience and enable them to join society with greater ability to engage and be economically independent. And what was happening is, as the word spread on the streets, we were getting more and more children self-referring to our street-level centres and vulnerable parents. But we were also working in some 48 schools with a range of provisions where children in the schools were self-referring for therapeutic support or for our other programs.
So typically a child who's self-referred, and how would you decide what therapeutic support they require?
The types of children and young people and vulnerable people who were referring to us presented with very high levels of risk at the street level centres. So typically they would be children and young people who'd been sexually assaulted. They had multiple risk levels. UCL in 2013-14 carried out a piece of research looking at a cohort of our teenagers, and they found that 1 in 5 had been shot at and or stabbed, with 50% witnessing shootings and stabbings in the last year. That same cohort had been sexually abused. Many of them had been physically assaulted. They had chronic levels of neglect, and they had very poor literacy. So the way I would describe the client group that self-referred to the street-level centres is that they're buried under a rubble of multiple risks.
Okay, well, when an individual child presents themselves to you, how do you assess their needs and diagnose
What happens is, at the street-level centre, there are psychologists and social workers. They were present, a child turns up, obviously they don't arrive with any files, so we don't know anything about them. So we have to do a preliminary assessment to ascertain whether that child is in a condition of risk, where their life is at risk or where there is significant
Sorry
risk.
to interrupt you, but you are quoted sometimes as saying that you have met children who are psychotic and damaged.
Yes.
Could you explain what that means?
That means that we were getting young people who were literally so mentally ill that they were hearing voices, and some of them were hallucinating, some of them had extreme paranoia. This is as a result of often chronic substance misuse since they've been young children. And therefore we had a lot of young people who came extremely disturbed. And when you peel that...
You're a psychotherapist yourself?
I'm a psychotherapist myself.
What were your qualifications?
My qualifications are, I have a 4-year psychotherapy training. I've had 18 years of psychoanalysis. I did 1 year of art psychotherapy at Goldsmiths, and I've now got some 30 years of work experience behind me. Kids Company wasn't the first thing. I found it a place to be. Prior to that, I worked in Women's Aid.
And what professional bodies are you a member of?
I am accountable to UKCP, but I just haven't organised my membership to UKCP.
Accountable to?
To UKCP, United Kingdom Psychotherapy Association.
But you're not a member?
No, I'm not a member.
No. So
But
you're
I've
not a member of any professional body?
I'm not a member of any professional body because when I trained, it wasn't an absolute requirement that you became a member, but I have been speaking to UKCP before all this happened about them organising a membership.
But what qualifications have you got, or professional accreditations do you have in order to diagnose somebody as psychotic and damaged?
I don't personally diagnose. We have psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses who diagnose, but life experience teaches you a lot.
Chairman, could I just say something?
The evaluations of Kids Company, I don't know how many organisations have as many evaluations, and very thorough ones too. I mean, among them, which I did tell you, the Tavistock and Portman Trust, the Anna Freud Centre, the Royal Society of Medicine, the London School of Economics, University of Cambridge Medical School. I mean, Camilla is the CEO, but actually, if these evaluations are read and seen, I think people will not assume that Kids Company doesn't actually have the clinical know-how to deal with very, very difficult kids. And if I could say so, I've been involved with this charity for 20 years. I'm immensely proud of what happened. I'm very sad indeed that we haven't been able to complete the closure plan that we had. But I have to say, I've met these children, Chairman. I've seen them. There is one boy who you could show a group of children, who I've seen this photograph of this group of children in a gang. And, you know, the fact that the boy who we have looked after has now gone to UCL and has got a degree in law, the other 5 children in the picture are all dead. I mean, that's the kind of risk that some of these children, it's not 1 or 2, and I'm not exaggerating. So all I'd say is that the scope of Kids Company's work is from individuals who need a light touch, who need to be part of a community, who need to be in a school where there is actually the possibility of learning. And there are others who are in the most terrible damaged state.
So, Mr. Chairman, could I just ask Mr. Yentl, you said about the evaluations by all these various bodies, and you put that in your reference. Was any of those evaluations actually paid for by Kids Company?
Can I just say something? I'm really offended by the remark, but if the BBC, the government, commission from reputable organisations, they commission reports. I don't think we fully paid for anything, but we did commission reports and we would participate in the funding. But that's
the LSE one, for example, there was no money came from Kids Company to LSE.
The LSE was paid for, but that is suggesting that one of the most eminent institutions...
No, with the greatest respect, it's not suggesting anything, it's simply asking a question.
Yes, some...
People have suggested it.
Yeah, some research was paid for and some was not paid for. The government paid for research. The government, wanted the Tavistock and NHS Portman Trust to do a piece of evaluation on us. That doesn't mean that I hope it was invalid.
A lot of these were partnerships with organisations, University of Cambridge over brain research, the Royal Society of Medicine and others. I don't think all these reputable organisations would have cooperated and collaborated with Kids Company if they were all fraudulent and somehow paid for and they were trying to make money.
But very often university research is conducted by individuals, and some of the research is contested.
Well, when the research, if the research, fine, fair enough. I wouldn't say that every aspect of research, of course, if it's all contestable. And as you know, there was the Centre for Social Justice did a report called Enough is Enough, which actually said that the care system was a problem and needed to be addressed. And many very eminent people wanted to be on that task force. I've given you the list of people. So all I would say is that the sense that the work that Kids Company was doing had no real value is something I would ask you to reconsider, because I don't think that's true.
In one of your letters to the government, and I'm trying to find it, but you refer to genetic changes happening in the kids. I mean, this is very, very contentious and very contested.
Well, all scientific research has two sides to the coin, but the point is that there is actually an evolving field of neurobiology that suggests that environmental care conditions sculpt the brain's capacities and have an influence on how our physiology is expressed. And the reason for that is that we're increasingly realizing that it isn't as simple as you have your genetics and you grow into them, or it's just your environment, that actually the two have an interplay and influence each other. And this body of research is pointing to the fact that increasingly, as children and young people are facing extreme adversities and they secrete a lot of fright hormones, that has an influence on how they then develop the capacity to control their behaviors. And this actually is a very, very respected field of research across the world now.
Looking at your business model, the fact that you had a very demand-led model, which involved providing, in some cases, very generous support, financial support to individuals, how did you avoid creating just a different kind of dependency amongst your client group?
I think that's an interesting way of putting that question, because I might come at it in a slightly different way, which is that there are large numbers of very vulnerable children and young people who are being abysmally failed in this country by their government because they're not being protected.
Well, that's, with respect, that's not answering the question.
May I finish? Because they're not being protected and they're not being cared for appropriately. Social work departments and child mental health departments are at breaking point because they're underfunded. Consequently, very vulnerable children are left outside the doors of those agencies, and those children and young people, through word of mouth, were making their way to Kids Company to ask for help. And these were children and young people in conditions of extreme risk. We had University of Reading, who did a piece of research that showed that 86% of them, those who came to our street level centre, were impacted by food poverty. I would argue that actually these were children, young people and families in extreme desperation and a product of the failures of the state, and they came to Kids Company because they needed help.
But even if that is true, and we will come to the question of numbers later, does it necessarily help a kid to give them large sums of money which they go and spend on things perhaps you didn't intend them to spend it on? And I'm looking at a list of clients with the highest expenditure between January and December 2014, and it's tens of thousands of pounds for different clients, and the top one getting £73,000.
First of all, that client did not get £73,000. That client, that amount of money included that client's psychiatric treatment in a hospital because he was very ill and psychotic, and actually there was no beds available in the NHS. That particular client tried to jump off a bridge and police caught him mid-air, and he needed treatment throughout the period that he was with us, and as a result of that, that amount of money includes his treatment for psychiatric illness, his treatment for substance misuse, the support that his 2 children received, his housing emergency.
I can't possibly argue about individual cases.
No, but it's important not to suggest that that money was handed to that individual for their
but
spending.
large sums of money were handed to individuals.
Not large sums.
Okay, well, how big?
Well, first of all, I think...
Can you answer the question,
Yes,
please?
I will.
How
I'm
big?
about to answer that question. There were 3,000 clients who received some kind of support at Kids Company related to poverty intervention. That included food vouchers, bus passes where appropriate, and emergency allowances for a variety of reasons. Some families had no status whatsoever, and when the legislation changed and people without status were not allowed to claim benefits, that meant that there were mothers who were literally with their children starving,
Okay,
and we had to
what sort
hand
of
them
sums
food
were you
vouchers.
giving kids?
It was decided according, 3 professionals made the decision. This wasn't my decision. And an assessment was organised around each individual case, and the amount of money that an individual case received was dependent.
We're not going to get very far unless you answer the questions.
I am answering the question.
The question I asked
answer
is what sort of sums were children receiving?
Anything between 10 to a week, £10 a week in food vouchers or their bus passes to whatever the average that we did was entirely dependent on each child's circumstance. I can't pull out a figure for you.
Is it, I mean, we have seen plenty of reports of kids regularly receiving hundreds of pounds a week. Could that be possible?
No.
So
some did, some received.
So some did. So
some,
it's a yes.
No. Some, not kids for a start, not under 18s. Okay.
So you'd be handing out
clear.
hundreds of pounds to...
No, I haven't been handing out hundreds of pounds. Each individual case had to be decided on its own merit. I'll give you an example.
Okay, but you said not under 18, which suggests that people over the age of 18 were receiving hundreds of pounds. Is that the case?
No, not hundreds of pounds.
Okay,
no.
well, how much?
Well, it all depended on their circumstances.
So
you want me to give you an answer without the context.
We want you to answer
can't.
the questions, I'm afraid.
I am answering your question, and I'm saying to you, each individual case was decided on its own merit.
Okay, so was it true that people over the age of 18 were receiving perhaps more than £100 a week?
That would be very rare, and only if it was a family and they had to support a family.
You are aware that it is a contempt of Parliament to mislead this committee?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's a very serious thing?
Yeah.
Are you sure that's all you want to say about that answer?
Yes, I am saying to you, each case was decided on its own individual merit, depending on their circumstances. I can't go into individual cases because of confidentiality. So I'm very happy to discuss individual cases with the committee and go through the finances in private and explain why we spent money on particular children and young people.
Ms. Batman-Gellish, can I try and make it a little easier for you to answer the question in a way we can understand it, which would be helpful? You obviously can't give us the average, but proper financial management of the charity would indicate to me that there would be limits set. And over a certain higher limit, it would have to be escalated right up to the board for support.
Yes.
So could you perhaps give us the range of monies, vouchers and similar instruments that were handed out to clients of Kids Company, and at what level you would escalate it up to the board for a decision. So is it £5 to £100? Is it £5 to £5,000? At what stage would there have to be a high-level decision made on the level of funding you handed out?
Thank
5
you.
to 100, 5 to 1,000. I just want a straight, simple answer like that.
That's good. What we would do is 3 professionals would get together, do an assessment on a child or family, and decide if they needed a financial intervention. And that would range from £10 a week to, depending on if it was a family of several people, to £200 a week.
And over £200 a week, a decision would have to be taken much higher up the organisation.
No, it depended on what it was about. So, for example, if we needed to buy a child some clothes, then again that would be decided by the team who were there working together. All financial decisions above 5,000 would go to the board.
5,000?
5,000.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's clear.
All financial decisions over 5,000 would go to the board. That's quite significant. And we're talking about living costs. We did actually put people in residences and places like that, people who had nowhere to sleep, taken off the road. The vigilance of this was quite considerable. The Finance Committee met 10 times a year.
We'll come to the financial controls later.
Just to help you on the finance side, you do know that there were quarterly audits by Ecotech and Methods as well of how the money was being spent, so the clinical and financial reasons for things. And this was consistent, and these were government audits. So actually there was a level and there was a process, and these committees and groups would have to account for what they spent. Obviously we couldn't look at all the detail, but no figure over £5,000 could be spent.
But I mean, there have been very widespread reports of smaller amounts of money being handed out in quite large packages, large numbers of people. And one former employee saying that cash was distributed in little packages to every young person through a small window in reception.
May I explain how that happens?
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that's called a living allowance. Okay, so if someone was to get their food voucher or their bus pass, what we would have to do is count all of that at head office with 3 people overseeing it in the accounts department. Then everything would go in an envelope for the individual child with a receipt on top, so that it was then driven down to the street level centres, because the street level centres were in environments that were really high risk. We couldn't keep any kind of cash at those centres. When it would arrive at the end of the week at the street level centre, the team inside that reception area would oversee the handing out of the envelope for which the client had to sign, and then the receipts would come back to head office for accountability. And that's how this myth of the envelopes has evolved.
Well, it's not a myth, is it?
No, it's not a myth, and it's not something that was hidden. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that it's turned into the notion that it was handed out willy-nilly. It wasn't.
But how did you assess
accounted for
that supporting the kids in this way was actually doing any good to the kids?
Because they were professionals working in this organisation. There were 650 staff in this organisation. Some of them were some of the most experienced and senior. We had an ex-Ofsted inspector working in the organisation. These decisions were not made by me alone behind a desk. There was an entire team.
In your submission, you criticise Lambeth Social Services, for example, and cite the inspection report by the Statutory Inspection Authority for the failure of social services in Lambeth. What inspection regime were you subject to?
we were subject to a number of inspection regimes. All the government money that was given to us was audited quarterly.
No, I'm not talking about financial.
Yes.
I'm talking about what you were actually doing. CQC, you weren't regulated by CQC, were you? They didn't inspect you?
No.
So how did you satisfy yourself as a trustee, however well motivated you are, and I don't question that?
Yes.
How did you satisfy yourself that this was actually quality work being done that was properly verified by a proper inspection?
Because there were inspections and evaluations by a large number of organisations and institutions. The idea that Kids Company was not evaluated. Let me explain. Look, when I say I mentioned Lambeth, I have in front of me the report for Lambeth, and I know how challenging it is and how the funding is difficult. Every line here is inadequate. It says inadequate. It says the failure of leadership has resulted in the deterioration of almost all safeguarding services and services for looked after children and their families in Lambeth from when they were last inspected. It says, now, all I'm saying is these are challenging children. These are chaotic environments. Kids Company has been evaluated and looked at. We have been audited across a period of 8 years. We have never missed an audit. And there have been clinical and financial audits. That is the responsibility of government. I have visited the sites. I have seen the children. Now, it's not a perfect organisation, obviously, but it was doing something that others didn't do. And Chairman, I want to say about the money. Very few clients in Kids Company were given more than £70,000 a year. That was about the top rate.
Expenditure, not given.
Expenditure, not given. If you look at some mental health provision, I said the maximum. If you look at some mental health provision for individuals in problems, those figures can lead into hundreds of thousands, and if you want the evidence later, I'll give it you. The truth is that there was a range of activities and a range of need. My belief, and I think Kids Companies, and I think this is a very important thing, is the issue of early intervention. Early intervention saves money, and this early intervention can be a light touch. It can be a schoolroom where there is all kinds of problems going on. Where if you look after the key children, if you've got a virtuous circle of care and concern, then you can start to address problems very early on, and a whole community can begin to learn from it. That's something of the Kids Company.
Did you ever invite?
We were
just
inspected.
a minute. Did you ever invite Ofsted to come and inspect you?
Ofsted has been inspecting some of our provision. In fact, if you look at our provision, the Treehouse, we had 2 Ofsted inspections.
But what about your whole operation? Why didn't you ask Ofsted to come and inspect the whole thing?
Because there were times when we fitted into Ofsted structures, and there were times where we didn't, but we had continuous dialogue with Ofsted.
So
all the local authorities who were placing children for education with us inspected our provisions. That included Southwark, Lambeth, Wandsworth, Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea. They were all placing students with us, and they would not have placed students with us for education if we hadn't passed their rigorous inspection systems. In addition to that, with every government grant that we received, we had government-appointed auditors alongside us reviewing both the results, the output and outcomes, as well as all the finances. So to answer Kate Ho's question, it was ecotech, methods, they were crime concern, evaluated us for the Home Office, Cordis Bright evaluated us for the Home Office, Louise Casey in the early days, the Youth Justice Board evaluated us between 2002 and 2003, and then we had, when government gave us grants, Nick Hurd asked an independent audit to be done on Kids Company, which was really very, very good, except that they said that we didn't have enough sustainable funding to make us secure. So actually I would argue that we were intensely inspected. We had a range of independent universities who came and did...
So when was your last Ofsted inspection?
our last office of inspection, because the official receiver has got all our records, I'm afraid I can't give you an exact date.
Well, you must
but
be
it
able
was
to
quite.
estimate.
It was quite recent. In Bristol, we had our provision reviewed by Ofsted before it got registered
And what
to
about
become an educational
the safeguarding
provision.
of children? Given that safeguarding issues have been raised, who inspected the safeguarding arrangements?
First of all,
children?
I would like to say to you that at no time have kids companies' safeguarding procedures been questioned.
But when were they last inspected?
What has happened is we were at the receiving end of what we don't understand.
No, I'm not asking that question.
Malicious
I am
allegations.
asking a different question. I'm asking a simple question.
I think I'm answering
When
it.
did you last have your safeguarding arrangements inspected?
Our safeguarding arrangements, no one wanted those. They were not due for an inspection. Basically,
That didn't answer the question?
No, that's what
The answer was when?
Who by? Who did you want to
Well,
inspect our
presumably,
safeguarding procedures?
if you're running a charity that's looking after children, I don't know any institution which is not inspected, that looks after children that isn't inspected.
Can I answer some of that question?
Yes, please do.
There was a safeguarding system which enabled every worker, besides anything else, to also have it. There was a cause for concern form which was reviewed by staff at their centres, and if there were concerns that children were not being looked after, they would be able to report those. So there was internally a safeguarding system as well. Plus, as I have said, if the Centre for Social Justice was coming into the organisation and spending 17 months looking at that organisation and then reporting, as it did, compellingly about the condition of those children and how they were looked after. I mean, I'm trying to say it's not a perfect organisation, of course, but
a think tank
the notion
is not
that we weren't, Ofsted is not the only organisation.
I'm an admirer of the Centre for Social Justice, but it's not an inspector, it is not a regulator.
No.
Sorry, I think, we had continuous review. We had Professor Stephen Briggs.
I think we'll move on. I don't think we can learn any more
I'm
from
not
this.
sure what the issue is.
The point I'm making,
because
I'm going to, you've invited me to repeat it, so I will repeat it. It is simply that I know of no other large organisation that looks after children in this country which is not regularly inspected.
We were inspected.
Right.
That
We will
is
move
my
on.
answer to
Mr.
your
Flynn.
question.
A memo sent from Kids Company to the Cabinet Office stated that the communities served by Kids Companies would, if the charity closed, descend into savagery, and warned of potential increases in looting, rioting, arson attacks on government buildings. I mean, to what extent do you regard this as a reasonable assessment of the situation?
There must be people in this room who know about risk assessment.
Did you write this letter?
I didn't write the letter, no. I wrote the letter about the restructure. I did not write that letter. It was written by the safeguarding team.
Sorry, can you just speak up a little bit?
Sorry. I didn't write that letter, no. It was an appendix which was a risk assessment form which was required and requested. And most risk assessment forms are what is the most extreme that could happen. Can I also just say something about this? So that was what it was.
All right. Can we just look at that?
Yeah.
Can we put the warning in that letter as one that was a wild exaggeration?
No, it wasn't.
And you accept? Why?
Can I explain why? Okay, I'll explain why.
Why did that happen?
We'll explain why.
I'll explain why it wasn't a wild exaggeration. It wasn't I do accept that it's a worst case scenario. That is what risk assessments in any organisation are required to be. What is the worst that could happen? Remember the riots in 2011, which Camilla, in fact, warned Oliver Letwin might happen. Let me answer your question. I will. 5 days after Kids Company closed, a boy was murdered. He was going to the crime prevention centres, which were closed. If you read the account of that and what was said at the time by those people in that area, you will hear what they said, and you will hear what they said about the risks that happened once Kids Company had gone. I also gave in the evidence 2 letters from the Metropolitan Police, which were utter and compelling endorsements of the work Kids Company does in Lambeth, and the fact that that work would be sorely, sorely missed. There were stabbings. There were 4 suicide attempts. I haven't talked about this, but I'm now telling you that these things happen. So,
can I just tell you, may I just qualify what you just said?
Yeah.
We have been advised that these incidents occurred because kids no longer had money to pay their drug pushers. And the lack of the breakdown of the flow of funds onto the streets has led to that violence. Former clients no longer being able to pay.
I know this is a parliamentary session, but I think it's a terrible allegation to make against Kids Company that when violence, well, the Metropolitan Police certainly didn't say that, and if you look at the evidence that I presented, so I find that a rather shocking.
Well, I'm putting it to you because it's what's been told to us by a very reputable source.
This is the essence of the problem, really, because I feel that actually representatives of leadership in this country don't really have a visceral understanding of what it's like in some of these neighbourhoods for many of the children, young people and families. The levels of violence and perversion that some of these children and young people are having to endure is really very shocking. We were spending about 1.1 million on security. I think you need to be a bit fairer.
I don't think I'm being unfair. I'm merely putting it. Yeah. Just order. I'd like to go back to Mr. Flynn, but before that.
Because I really do want to push you on that bit where you said that the communities over the border in my constituency, served by Kids Company, might descend into savagery. Do you not think that is a really shocking thing to say about ordinary, decent people who find that just an amazing statement to make?
First of all, I want to repeat that was a safeguarding document which was intended to be a worst case scenario. Secondly, I have just described events that were happening in the area which I believe were very, very regrettable and tragic, and they were as a consequence of the absence of a place for these children to go, who were not being cared for by others and who may well have been abusing, some of them, drugs and other things. This is an environment which was not safe and was chaotic. And if you saw the letter that I attached from 2007 from the Metropolitan Police saying we would really value Kids Company staying open between 7 and 10 in the evening as a crime prevention centre. That is what happened. That was a tremendous benefit to the community. And only 2 months before Kids Company closed, the Metropolitan Police, Inspector Jack Rowlands, wrote another letter to say that he would like to collaborate with Kids Company in discussing the trauma that these... I know, but I feel I want to let people know.
Of course, and we want you to have this opportunity to put your side of the story.
I would like
sorry, can I go back to Mr. Flynn, please?
Say that we've had a great deal of psychobabble, we've had a great deal that demonstrates Mr. Yentop's creative abilities, but would you please answer our questions briefly so we can get on? I think if we can look at the numbers that you quoted to start, and past employees of your company expressed cynicism about the accuracy of the suggestion that the number of clients you had in 2010 was 16,500, and the numbers leapt to 36,000 in the following year. Now you maintain that's the same number. If that's so, why was it that only 1,699 cases were handed over to the Lambeth Authority when you closed down?
These are all very important questions, and
I'm could you answer why did the number go from 36,000?
Yes, I'm going to.
Presumably the majority were from that local council, the immediate neighbourhood. It went from 36,000, and in reality, the numbers that were produced were 175 in Bristol and 1,699. Why?
First of all, the numbers don't pertain just to one local authority. What were the
numbers given then to all the local authorities?
That was for the whole of London.
There are two bits to this question. Yes. One is the overall numbers.
What was the overall number you handed over? You said
to the local authorities, right. What happened is that...
Could you give me the number?
Yes, I'm about to...
We'll be here all day.
No, I would like to be able to answer your question as accurately as possible. What we did is we handed over 1,717 referral sheets, which had on them families. So altogether, the safeguarding team and the mental health team who put those referrals together think that they handed over between 3,000 to 4,000 clients once you put all the referrals in.
Could I stop you, Bill? Because this, have you? There's an ex-employee of yours told the Times that they were instructed to shred client records after the charity closed. Is this an instruction from you? And does it mean that records that would prove that they were 36,000 clients don't now exist?
First of all, that is completely incorrect. We did not shred any client records, and the records were all handed over to the official receiver. And what we handed over are 18,000 hard copy files that contain family members in them. So one file may pertain to several people who are in that particular family. In addition, we handed over a database of our most high-risk cases, which amounted to 15,933 individuals. And we handed over copies of the 1,717 referral forms we did. Absolutely no records were shred whatsoever.
How did Kids Company identify those potential clients who were genuinely in need?
Because we do a rigorous assessment and we do home visits.
The self-referral, you say?
Yes, when they come to the centre.
Do you think it was more to do with the wraparound cash that you were giving them? If people were turning up, and it hasn't been denied, and we've been told that some people were getting £160 a week, isn't that more of an inducement for people to identify themselves in need of your services?
With appreciation, if this is about respect for vulnerable people, that is making the assumption that people who need help in these poor communities
are
accessing help in such a distorted way. The truth is that there are a huge number of vulnerable individuals. In fact, it's so bad that this country doesn't even capture the real numbers. How do you measure
the number in the areas where you work? How do you decide that we all represent various parts of the country? All these problems occur there. I mean, why is there suddenly a huge unmet service that you claim to be providing for in the particular area where you work?
Okay, I'm really glad you've asked me this question, because what's happening in this country is that the numbers of children who get into social services and child mental health are controlled by a process which is a sort of hidden gatekeeping, because the local authorities can't cope.
What percentage of the children?
Please let me finish, because you're not allowing me to finish. Please let me finish.
Let her answer this question.
Because it's really important that you understand this problem, because that's at the heart of the difficulties that we're all experiencing as a country. Basically, there is a gatekeeping process in local authorities because they don't have enough money to cope with the scale of the problem. So what happens is that when children and young people are referred into social services or child mental health, they can't always take that number of kids. So they have to select who they're able to help and who they're not able to help. And if you want the real figures, the NSPCC in their report, How Safe Are Our Children, attempted to have a go, because actually in this country we do not capture the real numbers of vulnerable children and young people who need help. The child mental health data was not updated for 11 years. That means that this country's economic arrangements around child mental health was organized around 11 years ago's data. So what you get is when children and young people can't get into social services or child mental health, they're left outside the doors of those agencies without anyone really measuring the level of need. And when Kids Company allows self-referral, these people self-refer.
We've got the point. Mr. Yentov, very briefly.
Just try to give you some short, concise answers to this. First of all, in terms of the numbers, the fact is that 20,000 of these children, of these 36,000 children, are in schools, okay? And the question of, we're not saying that they were given, every one of them was given therapeutic care, but in terms of evaluation, there is detailed, the schools have got a detailed record of how much contact there was with each of these children. And I assure you, it's very difficult for Camilla, and please let me explain this. I have given it you in this document. It's important to me you understand it. So that is what the majority of. The government's money, the 4.25 million in the later years that came in, or 4.5, went to look after 800 children. That's 4.2 million for only 800 children. So consequently, when we talk about this breadth of service, it's a different, there's a different level of service for each of these children.
Okay, well, how honest is it to put into your annual accounts that you were helping 36,000 people?
Well, let me answer that question. Let me answer it. Let me answer this question. In the annual report, it's absolutely clear and broken down, even in the numbers that I've given you, how much was done. 19,000 young people per year were supported by our children's services. It then goes into detail about how many of them were given personalised support, what was going on. So it is actually detailed how many got direct contact.
Why was Kids Company so reluctant to hand over the records of these people to Mr. David Quirk Thornton of Southwark Social Services?
Yeah, very straightforwardly. And I think this is terribly important as well, because Camilla isn't running all this, 36,000 children. There are 650 workers. Those 650 key workers, that is 73% of the cost of Kids Company goes on the staff, not on handing out money to people or sending people to university.
Okay,
or
but why was there reluctance to hand over the records?
Because data protection, I think the other issue is that data protection of vulnerable clients.
That's an issue.
There are legal issues.
That's not true. They'd be entirely protected if you handed them over to Lambert. That's an excuse. Could you just tell me, just briefly, could answer one question? Yeah. How do you help someone's mental health by buying them a pair of shoes that cost £150?
Excuse me, because I think the way... the way you've put that question is really unjust. Because actually, I would like to answer it. Please let me answer it. Because actually, the structure of that question is immensely disrespectful to vulnerable people.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I want to be able to answer it.
I think
Mr. Flynn, let her answer, please.
I would like to answer it.
But quickly.
You can have mental health difficulties and you can still need a pair of shoes. So the two...
For £150?
I don't know where you're getting that from, and because I don't have any records and I don't have any name, I don't know what that question...
You're running an organisation without records.
Sorry?
You're running an organisation without records.
No, the organisation has records, but the records are in the hands of the official receiver, to which I have no access. So I don't know what you're referring to, but what I am saying to you is that when we had people with mental health difficulties, and we had people, one mother jumped off a multi-storey block and was in a coma. We were raising the alarm.
We don't live on the moon. We represent areas that have great problems. We know about them. But please don't try to treat us as though we're a prime minister and you're trying to get 30 million out of us. We want to know what happened to this organisation which has collapsed, damaging many people. Possibly the results of it will do a great deal of harm to the clients you had. But you give a non-stop spiel of mostly psychobabble. You don't answer the questions. I asked you, how do you measure unmet need in boroughs? And we've had this torrent of words since, verbal exercise, but no answer.
Okay, I would just like to
I would argue that I did answer you. You might not like my answers, but I did answer you.
I would just like to press on this one point, and then I want to come to colleagues. the Director of Southwark Social Services only extracted 1,699 records from you when from your claims of the number of people you were supporting, he would have expected thousands. He also makes it clear that if there was this massive unmet need in his borough and in other boroughs, particularly if the support is being withdrawn from these people, they would know about it. Why don't you think they know about it?
Okay, two things. First of all, when the local authorities wanted us to hand the cases over, they had a telephone meeting with us in which they actually described the type of cases that they were prepared to take. And that included child protection that was of extreme need. They didn't want any people with no status unless there was a child protection issue that they were concerned about. And consequently, that narrowed down our referrals, because the child protection cases that they wanted were predominantly under 21. And then within that, they were also prepared to look at, as I understood it, people with extreme mental health difficulties. And that's what we did. We narrowed down the client group to what they were prepared to take, and that's what we handed over. And I would like to say that there needs to be some rigorous accountability applied to the local authorities as to what happened to these cases, because the group that I had, who were vulnerable care leavers, who were adults predominantly, and who were people with extreme mental health difficulties, they were not picked up. And I have evidence of toing and froing with local authorities.
Yeah. And perhaps you could tell us whether you think Councillor Peter John, leader of Southwark Council, has said on repeated occasions Southwark and colleagues from other London councils asked for the details of all Kids Company London-based clients. We set no thresholds and imposed no criteria. We simply wanted the details of all their clients that could assess their needs and offer support. Any child, young person vulnerable that is eligible for some level of support, and how much London Council had spent last year. Are you saying that, and then you basically say the list they got was only a total of 299 cases. Are you saying that Councillor Peter John is mistaken?
What happened, there were two phases to this. Phase one, before we were even anywhere near absolutely closing, as part of the contingency, they wanted all the information, all the data on all our clients. And this was before we got to a point of closure. And at that point, we were seeking legal advice to find out where the boundaries were in terms of confidentiality and our allegiance to our clients and their trust in us. When we closed Kate, which was very sudden, that's when the local authorities got together and had this discussion about the boundaries around the types of cases that they would accept from us.
But he also
says that boundary.
He also says that when the official receiver stepped in following the charity's closure, they find no other files to pass on to us. So clearly there weren't these huge numbers that you were...
The files, that is incorrect. The files went into storage, actually.
Okay, so they're in storage.
18,000 files.
Why haven't you handed them over?
No, we did hand them over, but they went into secure storage because...
So how many files?
18,000 files are currently in secure storage, and 15,933 pieces of sort of individual cases are on our Aurora database.
So why haven't you handed that over to Mr. Quirk Thornton?
Because actually they made a discussion. They actually told us what they were prepared to take, and we handed over to them.
That's not what he's told us.
Well, I'm afraid this is the essence of the problem.
So everybody disagrees with you.
There is no interest for the local authorities or central government
so it's a
to
conspiracy.
admit, let me finish, to admit to the scale of child protection failures in this country. I would like to remind you that this government is in charge of a child protection system where 3/4 of them, which have been inspected by Ofsted, have been declared as unable to protect children robustly. That is not the responsibility of kids company.
One final question, really. Did any of your employees who left have been asked in the last 6 months to sign, or recently, a non-disclosure of saying anything that they wouldn't be?
You mean when we closed?
Yeah.
At the point of closure?
A statement.
No, when we closed, we have never asked an employee.
What about the 4 board directors who left? Did they sign anything that they wouldn't speak or say anything?
I was not involved in any of that.
Do you know if your board members, when you lost them, did they sign a non-disclosure?
I think 2 of the board members, as we did, signed agreements that when they left, that just as we do in the BBC when people leave.
It's not the BBC. Are you comparing Kids Company to the BBC?
Well, I'm comparing any organisation of that size.
So they did sign.
There was nothing unusual about that. No.
Well, they'd signed that they would not say anything,
Yes.
non-disclosure.
Well, I think 1 or 2 of them did. It was done by the HR department, so I'm not quite sure. And if I may say so, there has been data stolen. There is a police investigation into data protection. And there's a rather casual view about these clinical data. I do understand what you're saying about these records. Now, the records are there. I believe that these records are as dense and as clear as any in any organisation. In other words, there are many children, and they have been there's been a very substantial amount of auditing and recording of this data, and it will be available, and at the right time it will be seen.
Well, may I suggest that you have another meeting with Mr. Quirk Thornton and settle your differences, because there seems to be an enormous disagreement about some very basic facts between you. And I believe that he is going to be publishing a report very shortly, and if that report is not to be as inaccurate as it seems it's likely to be, according to you, then you need to settle what he's going to publish.
We would welcome that, but I do have to say that both central government and the local authorities have no interest in admitting
They're hiding the truth.
The scale of the problem
They want
that
to hide the
exists
truth.
in this country.
I think that a lot of good councillors, certainly in my area, will see that as a very, very exaggerated statement.
I'm sorry, it's not mine only. The Centre for Social Justice carried out a piece of research,
Mr. Jones.
416 pages
Mr. Jones.
of evidence,
Order.
and that
Order.
is a conservative-initiated
Order.
think tank.
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Yentob, could I refer you to the second of the 2 very helpful memos that you sent to the committee, where you detail the level of activity of Kids Company?
Yes.
And you refer to the year 2014, in which you say Kids Company's services reached approximately 36,000 children, young people and caregivers each year.
Yeah.
You then go on to break down the level of activity in some considerable detail.
Yeah.
19,000 young people per year supported by our schools programme. That headline figure is further broken down. 9,700 young people per year supported by our street-level centres and therapeutic surgeries. And again, you break it down in some considerable detail. And then 7,200 parents, family members or caregivers also supported. It seems to me that you've done a considerable amount of research in preparing this document and in analysing this data. Is that right?
Yes. Can I be clear? This has all been documented by a very significant team of people who have been doing this over a long period of time. Why do you find this strange?
I don't find it at all strange. You're actually.
You mean have I personally?
You're making assumptions. The point I'm making to you is that you've carried out a considerable amount of research in order to produce this data, which leads me to believe that this data and the files that generate the data are available now.
Yes.
Well, they are available. Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
And you have access to them.
Well, they're with the official receiver right now, and they're under.
We would be able to evidence this.
So again, and I think this is an important point, only some 1,600 files have been handed over to social services.
To Southwark and Lambeth.
Yes.
Referrals.
Which one would have expected to be considerably more. Sorry, I'm speaking to Mr. Yantop. No, forgive me.
Schools children.
Forgive me.
I'm
asking Mr. Yantop.
Yes, I have to say that although I have been very involved in trying to do the restructure, which we haven't talked about, and the auditing and the governance, which I'm very happy to talk about. The issue of how many files were handed over is also partly due with a negotiation between Southwark and the clinical team. And I do take, though, what you say, and I think we do need to address if there's a disagreement or a concern about what was or wasn't handed over. I'm very happy to see that we address that.
Who told you, Mr. Yantop, that you were precluded from handing over those files by reason of data protection?
It's not the team who are clinically looking after this material had concerns about some of the data protection, and some of it has been stolen. I mean, let's be clear. There are there's a thing of the 25 most high-risk clients. You just talked about it. That should never be.
Yes, I understand that. But,
so
but as I
understand
it, your reluctance to hand over.
No, can I just say I'm not reluctant to hand over anything. It's just legal issues. There are lawyers. There's the official receiver, and I'm very happy. In fact, I would like as much as possible to be handed over, as I've said also to the Metropolitan Police about these allegations of sexual misconduct.
Do you accept that Southwark Council has a statutory right to demand those papers from Kids Company?
If they have, I think they should have them and be given them. I have not stopped this happening, and I would have said that it isn't even... I don't think the staff of Kids Company have a right to do that. Whatever is legally allowable and which protects the children should happen. I completely and utterly agree with that.
Can I just say something about the referrals? We did not hand over referrals of children who were in schools for therapeutic support. So that amounted to over 10,000 who were receiving therapeutic support in the schools, because the understanding was that because it was the schools were closed, and secondly, it was felt that the schools had a safeguarding structure where they could actually look after those children. What we focused on was the children, young people that the council said were eligible, who attended the street-level centres.
I want to move on to the question of governance. Is that what you want to ask about?
It all sort of segues into that.
Okay, we'll take one question and then we'll move on.
Yes, it was further to Mr. Flynn's line of questioning. Obviously, this is taxpayers' money, or it's charitable funds. When we're discussing a lot of these examples, we've had evidence from other witnesses that when social services have looked at the use of these funds, they've said that actually there wasn't a need for those clients to have any support. They weren't in need of support. So I suppose my question is, what is your response to that? And how do you determine that these uses of taxpayer and charitable funds are actually being used properly and not just being handed out willy-nilly at the discretion of your employees?
That's a very good question. First of all, when we get our government grants, they are restricted grants, and that money is attached to individual children and young people with needs. So the Department of Education actually worked very closely with us to determine with us who those young people were, and they audited us against those young people's outcomes, and they checked the expenditures in relation to those young people that government gave us grants for. So it's very important to understand that not only the civil servants inside these government departments were regularly meeting with us to actually look at the caseload and what we were doing, but every quarter there were financial reports submitted to that particular government department, as well as clinical reports outlining exactly what was done for the young people and what those outcomes were, and we were audited against that.
So how do you account for this very strong evidence from a very credible witness that in fact, when social services looked in many of these cases, they simply said you were servicing clients where the need did not exist? So that is, again, it's taxpayers and charitable funds being used for clients where there simply is not the need for it?
First of all, when we closed, there was such a rush to hand over the cases to social services that social services, the local authorities, only got one sheet. And by the time they got the referral sheet on a Friday, by Saturday morning, they were briefing the Sunday Times that we didn't have the child protection cases. Actually, to ascertain whether someone is warranting child protection, you have to carry out a comprehensive assessment, and only after the assessment can you say whether someone should be receiving a service or not. And I would argue with you that the local authorities did not carry those assessments out. So these are allegations that have been thrown at Kids
These are not
Company
simply thrown allegations. The evidence we were given was that social services had in fact visited these clients, carried out an assessment and determined that there was simply not a need, a protection need to be engaging with these people. And the concern I'd like you to address is how is that the case? It's not just an isolated example. We were told on many, many occasions this was the case.
I would welcome a scrutiny of what social services actually did with those cases. I did not accuse anyone
but
of
I mean, your
anything.
implication is they've misled us.
I'm not in a position to comment on that, but I can only go by the evidence of my own caseload.
Well, it would help if you handed over the records.
I can only go by the evidence of my own caseload, and I would say, in the spirit of fairness, there should be a proper, comprehensive and independent of government audit of what social services did with those cases that were handed over.
Right. Governments. Cheryl.
You understand we are trying to learn from
Yes.
the evidence we're taking about Kids Company, and I'm particularly interested in the governance and how that works with the trustees. So can I just start with a general question? Mr. Yentov, how would you describe your relationship with the Chief Executive Officer, or the former Chief Executive Officer of Kids Company?
I would describe it as a relationship which was very proper, that there was a board of trustees, and I was obviously the chair of that board of trustees, who were immensely well qualified, and I think you need to look at who they were. You've seen what I referred to, that the deputy chairman was the former chief executive of W.H. Smith.
I'm asking about your relationship.
Yeah, my relationship was
how
one
would you describe your
in which I believed in the work. The clinical work and the therapeutic work that was done was, as you see, as I believe, evaluated not just by us but by auditors, clinical auditors and others.
Mr. Yentov, I'm not asking about the work. Yeah. We've done that bit.
Yes.
I'm asking you about your relationship as the chairman of the board of trustees with the chief executive officer. Could you describe your relationship?
Yes, my relationship was to oversee what Kids Company did, to see that the governance of it was appropriate, to ensure that it was the kids who were looked after were accounted for, and that other organisations were able to inspect and see what was going on. Yes.
You've still not described your relationship.
Well, what do you want me to say?
I mean, do you?
We didn't socialise.
We did. That's what you mean. We don't
I'm just
have.
I mean, because I want to know why you decided to replace Ms. Batman-Gelia as the chief executive officer, and how difficult that was.
Let me explain. First of all, I've given you, I think, a very clear view of how the organisation was audited and governed. And I just want to say that at the end of, in March of 2014, a PKF report of the governance of the whole organisation, as we've been talking about some of this today, i.e. the clinical audits and the rest of it, were reviewed by PKF, and their conclusions were governance systems appropriate for size and complexity, comprehensive policies and procedures at the charity, no recommendations, re-improvements. He then said, I will be using Kids Company as a case study in a presentation I'm giving next week. And I want to say this because I know this has been a rather sort of to and fro, and it's quite difficult for Camilla to express what the work that's going on across such a scale.
Actually,
no, but I do think...
I'm asking you, Mr.
Yes.
Yankov, as chair of the Board of Trustees, to try and set the scene for us.
Yes.
Why did the trustees decide to change the leadership of Kids Company and replace Ms. Batman-Gelly?
For many years, Camilla was an amazing fundraiser. And she managed to double the funds coming in, not from government grant, but from outside sources over between 2008 and 2014. It was very, very significant. In addition to that, she was having to run this organisation as well. Her health wasn't perfect. And she had always planned at the end of 20 years that it would be time to change. She hoped by then that the organisation would be funded with a greater statutory level. The truth is that once we got to the point where we had to downsize the organisation because the funding levels had stopped, because government funding would not continue, it wasn't possible really to say for Camilla to carry on doing that job, because the demands of fundraising required a different model, and not just for her but for me too. So we had a group of philanthropists who had worked with the organisation for many years, and I just want to say this, not just put money there, but actually some of those people had been coming to the building 2 or 3 times a week. John Frieda, for instance, had his own sort of part of the organisation. So as a consequence of that, it was not possible any longer, and nor would the government approve or agree to Camilla carrying on being both the chief executive and also the inspiration, if you like, behind the charity. I know it's difficult to say this, but it is tricky for me when Michael Gove even said it was an inspirational charity, it was a great audit, he really believed in it, and he said that himself in March 2015. He's a government minister. Nick Hurd believed in the charity and the work that it did, and so did David Cameron, many other people in government. It's difficult to explain what goes on in these areas, but if you've experienced it, you understand that there was a great need which was served. But I think I answered your question, didn't I?
But Mr. Yentop, basically, Ms. Batman-Gelly was removed as a condition of the grant coming from government, as I understand it.
Yes, but but when you say that, I also said that I would step down also as chair, because I believed it's true that it was time for change, and that as the government was no longer going to be funding directly the organisation, and as the statutory system was still one which had not altered, and therefore the self-referral principle wouldn't work, it was necessary that those people who ran it were people who would also be able to help to fund it, and that this new model was essential if the organisation was going to thrive.
Actually, I was going to go.
Sorry, we're not asking you a question at the moment. Cheryl Gillen.
Yeah. Have I answered your question?
We have these formats, so and I'm addressing Mr. Yentop. I will ask you a
But when you
question.
say...
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
You were the chair of trustees from 2002.
2003, yes.
2003. That's a long time to sit as the chair of a trustee. But one of the responsibilities of trustees is to try and refresh and bring in new ideas and look at new approaches. Did you consider at any stage that perhaps you had passed your sell-by date? Or had you got so involved and believed so strongly in this charity that it was almost impossible for you to separate yourself from that?
I think it's a fair question. I would say that yes, I probably should have stepped down earlier. However, I do believe that I was a chair who was necessary, and that I had relationships with people who could help and fundraise, that I had enough understanding of what was going on. You've heard the complexity of this. It's a very challenging organisation. The support that came from it was not from people who were, had no experience. The support was immense from all areas, and people who did see it. So I felt that because it was so, especially the last few years, kind of difficult, the last 2 or 3 years where we were trying to fundraise, trying to create a statutory model which would work more effectively, and clearly because of my experience, because I was able to talk to people and interrogate them, and because of the board I had behind me, yes. But if you're saying in a different world, would it have been better if I'd stepped down? If I could have found the right person to take over, and in fact Stuart Roden was going to take over, he did not want me to stand down from the organisation, nor do I think the Cabinet Office did.
How often did you challenge any decisions made by the Chief Executive Officer when it was Ms. Batman-Gelly?
more than you might imagine.
Can you remember the last time you challenged a decision?
Yes, I remember.
And what was it?
Last time I had the last 6 months, every other day, really, in terms of the funding of the children, because we took over responsibility in the last, really essentially from January onwards of this year. Every pound spent had to be overseen by a trustee. The deputy chair from May onwards was responsible for signing off everything. So that was a tough argument about money for the children or not. Because remember, we didn't go insolvent. We carried on until the day when the government decided that they would go ahead with us, having listened to the complaints, having gone to the PwC. It was only the allegation of sexual misconduct, which we do not believe has any veracity behind it, which meant that we did not restructure and were able to carry on. So I would say that the amount of effort and need to keep this organisation going, to look after the children, you may question some of these issues, but believe me, there were many children who needed kids companies' help. So all I would say is I should have stepped down if it had been possible that we were not living through this very difficult period in the last 15 months, then I could have done that and handed over to someone like Stuart earlier than I did. But as I say, I think negotiating our way through all this, which we succeeded in doing, and I don't believe that the Cabinet Office rolled over at all. You know that some people didn't want us to carry on. I think if you've seen any of the correspondence between us and the Cabinet Office...
We'll come to that.
I've just got one last question for Ms. Batman-Gillish. How often did you meet with the Board of Trustees?
They were incredibly involved, actually, at least 6 or 7 times a year was the formal trustees meetings, and then there were risk committees, which met regularly. The finance committee met monthly, and I was present for that one. And in addition to all of that, the trustees were regularly on the premises in one way or another, dealing with issues. You couldn't have had a more rigorously involved Board of Trustees.
And did you keep regular and detailed minutes of every trustee meeting?
Yes, they were rigorous and detailed minutes.
So we can apply to have those?
If you wish to have them, yes. Yeah.
And my very last question is, how would you describe your relationship with the chairman and with the Board of Trustees?
I would describe my relationship as one of cordial professionalism. These were not people that I was socializing with. I was very much accountable to them, and I met them only in relation to dealings related to the practices and work at Kids Company. So it was an absolutely a cordial professional relationship.
So you never went out to dinner with Mr. Yentov?
No, I think in 20 years.
In 20 years.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I think I've only ever been to one dinner with the trustees. Yeah.
Right, that's right. Oliver Dowden.
Now I begin by saying I'm not in any way seeking to question Ms. Batman-Gelly's motivation or desire to help the vulnerable children in question, but I just want to understand better the role of the Chief Executive, particularly given this organisation has expanded massively over the years. We've received evidence that Ms. Batman-Gelly continued to deal with a number of clients right up to the very end. Yeah. That's quite unusual in an organisation such a large size. First of all, is that correct? And secondly, do you think that is appropriate?
Yes, I do. I think it is very unusual, and I don't think anyone can look or listen to Camilla and say she isn't an unusual chief executive of an organisation. I would also profoundly believe and know that the work that was done was remarkable. And if there were flaws on the way, if people abused the system, if consistent drug takers were given a bit of money and they took drugs, and then when you mention it, suddenly on the streets there's chaos because they're going back to drug taking, well, let's look at what that means as well. But having said that, the fact that Camilla was able to stay in touch, because emblematically everybody knew she cared for them, all these children, probably cared for children that most people didn't care for, or children who some may say they're not vulnerable, but they are. There are so many instances where that level of trust of not just Camilla, I have to say, and I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, I would say, listen to what the people who looked after those children have to say. Listen to their stories. See if you think they are invented stories about the children. Believe me, they are extraordinary. I have been reading some of them and getting a sense of a light touch, a heavy touch, bringing a family in. We had a place called the Heart Yard where the families of children who were disturbed and abused would come and they would learn from each other. It was a learning thing. It was a wide community. Some people you didn't spend money on at all, and we experienced this. And also I think the way that Camilla recruited, because she was like that, meant it wasn't obvious who she recruited. She had psychotherapists who were extremely experienced, but then there were other people who would sit and listen. And I think the individuals trusted her. And there are cases, extraordinary cases, where people would reveal things. For instance, in Bristol, there was a Somalian gang of paedophiles, and the one key witness in that was a witness who lived with the social worker, our worker, and then gave evidence because she trusted the social worker. And
I'm reluctant to cut you down.
Could I just press on this point?
Yeah.
Do you not think it gave rise to difficulties in terms of running an organisation of this size, which had grown so... I could see at the very beginning of the organisation, it reached this size, to have a chief executive having both a hands-on role in terms of service or helping the clients in question, but also trying to manage this large organisation, because certainly the evidence we've received is that this was creating problems.
First of all, sort of the answer is yes and no. In other words, was it time and was the burden too much? Camilla won't necessarily want me to say this. I think the pressure of the last year was huge on you.
I think that actually lack of funding was the problem, and I dealt with some of the most disturbed children and young people who other people didn't really want to have to deal with. And I want to go through an example of a case that I repeatedly referred to mental health.
Order. I don't want to go into individual cases.
May I ask?
I'm not going into an individual case.
I said yes.
Order. Oliver Dowden.
You said that you had a team of people working with you. Perhaps could you explain how you manage simultaneously the challenges of running a large organisation and at the same time dealing with the clients? Perhaps you could explain how you've managed that organisation.
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I had a team who helped me with some of the most disturbed children and young people that I was personally dealing with. And attached to that team was a clinical key worker who, when I was out doing the sort of administrative business of the charity, would keep an eye on my caseload on a daily basis. And there was a clinical director as well who was immensely experienced, who helped me with the cases. And there was two senior social workers who were also attached and made decisions around the cases that I dealt with. So
that's on the client side. How about on the actual management of a charity of this size?
Actual management of the charity of this size, we had all the right people in the right place. So there was head of HR and an HR department. There was a financial director who oversaw all the finances and a big accounts department. And bear in mind, 19 years of audits clean, and every quarter government report clean since 2002. And then we had a people operations manager who dealt with all the operational issues. We had head of safeguarding who dealt with safeguarding issues. I think people have absolutely underestimated the rigorous structures that were in place in relation to Kids Company. And all your questioning is based on elements of the media who've misrepresented the organisation.
Okay.
None of you have visited the organisation. You haven't had the opportunity to talk to any of the staff. You haven't accepted for evidence 43 letters that came from senior staff members and clients of the organisation as evidence.
If you want me to explain why we couldn't accept those as evidence, it's because they came from you.
They didn't come from me.
Well, get them to write to me separately and individually with their names.
No, they didn't. They did. First of all, I need to explain this because this again is an absolute misrepresentation.
It's not a misrepresentation.
The reason that the staff are unwilling to put their names on letters and send them separately to you because they absolutely feel unsafe by media behaviour.
I can assure you, if they write to me, if they write
media.
Order.
Please let me finish. I haven't finished.
Order. I just want to correct the record. If they write to me as individuals and they want their names to be kept confidential, they will be kept confidential.
Right, and their names are placed with a firm of solicitors.
I beg your pardon?
We do have these letters. This is what I explained to you when I sent them. Because staff are very anxious.
We can't accept them as objective evidence if they come through
I'm
you.
happy if you guarantee them confidentiality.
They
will. Then I'm happy to get them to you.
And that was
but
explained
as you
to
can
you by my
appreciate,
staff.
there's been an enormous amount of leaking from government offices into the media, and right now the staff don't feel secure because confidential papers
but you do
that
understand.
belong to inside the Cabinet
Office dealt with this
have been leaked into Newsnight
Please,
and
can you
BBC
stop
News.
Talking?
Right.
May I ask, sorry, just one final question. I think you were almost going to address this, Mr. Yentop. Do you feel, with hindsight, that perhaps you should have reviewed the structure of the organisation and Ms. Bakmangeli's extensive role within that organisation, both in terms of delivery and management of the organisation?
Well, yes, I do, but she's a rather remarkable individual woman, and she was responsible for this fundraising. She was the emblematic figure. She was visited year after year by people from across the world. But if you're saying to me, would it have been better if there was actually a different structure? Well, I don't know whether she would have achieved what she had, but certainly when we came to the last 2 years, the stress and pressure on her was so much. But it seemed very difficult at that time to change the structure because there was also a level of trust between people. If these very experienced trustees have been there and they have been, interrogating, even like you do, sitting here interrogating Camilla, we would interrogate Camilla like that. Then we would meet the children or see this extraordinary staff she's got, and we would understand that actually there was an argument for what she was doing. So
I just wish to follow up on 1 or 2 points.
Yeah, okay, but I don't.
Okay, you made your point.
I don't deny it.
The Charity Commission is very clear of what the obligations of a trustee actually are.
Yeah.
And one of the things they say is avoid mistakes, be prepared to challenge assumptions. Trustees, and I'm quoting, trustees must make decisions solely in the charity's interests, so they shouldn't allow their judgment to be swayed by personal prejudices or dominant personalities.
Yes.
Do you think in retrospect you've perhaps allowed that to happen?
No. I believe that all those points were taken on board, and ultimately the point is what is in the interest of the charity and the children they serve. And
when was the first time that the trustees discussed the possibility of removing Ms. Bakmangeli as chief executive?
We never talked about the words removing. That's an abusive term.
Okay, let's discuss it in the language you discussed.
We would often talk about whether Camilla could manage this effectively and whether they were the right people. But then we would meet the staff, and we would do this once a year. We would make sure we met the key staff who were running the place, and they were so impressive that we believed it was, and she was continuing to raise the funds and to run the place well. Where the problems happened, and
but she clearly wasn't running it well.
She was running it well, and I'm sorry, I don't accept that. She was running it well. Mr. Chairman, can I ask you, if Nick Hurd, Michael Gove, the Prime Minister Oliver Letwin all said this was an inspirational charity and that it was well run.
Well, order. In my previous life, I used to invest in small businesses started by entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And very often, the entrepreneur who started the business might be a brilliant person, but they weren't the right person to carry on growing the business once it had become a certain scale. You must have had that kind of
Yes,
discussion.
well, I think I acknowledge, even if Camilla doesn't hit me, but nevertheless, I have just acknowledged, you asked me, would it have been better at a certain point? The trouble is, when that moment arrived, problems escalated.
Well, that problem only arrived finally because the government said it was a condition of the grant that Miss Batman-Gelly should no longer have
No, it didn't
authority
just arrive
to
then,
spend
because
money.
in November that year, Camilla was planning to stand down.
But when did the trustees first discuss this issue?
Well, no, let me answer it. We discussed the issue, on a number of occasions.
When
during
did you
the course.
first discuss it?
We first discussed it at the beginning of 2014.
So it was never discussed before the beginning of 2014?
What was discussed was how Camilla could be supported, not Camilla not running the charity. No, and I just keep wanting to say that. Please, can I just say one thing? We were raising significant amount of money in a time of great stress, where children who led chaotic lives were not being picked up by others. We tried to make the best we could of that to look after those children. We felt that Camilla, in the time of a recession, who was not at the top of the organisation, could not be able to double the funding that was coming in and to continue to look after the interests of the children.
How did you distinguish, as a trustee, between the interests of Miss Batman-Gelly and the interests of the charity?
I was not interested remotely in the interests of Miss Batman-Gelly, and I don't think Miss Batman-Gelly is much interested in her interests either, otherwise we might have got through this.
As a charity trustee, your obligation is to make balanced and adequately informed decisions, thinking about the long term as well as the short term.
Yeah.
How did this model of always responding to demand address the long term when you didn't have any secure funding?
First of all, let me just say that until 2014, in 2012, there was a surplus, a reserve of 1.33 million. The problem with restricted funding is that the people who give you that money don't wish to see that sitting there and not being used in the manner that they have asked for, and we had a lot of restricted funding. What we then and the challenges from the escalation of need were distressing and terrible, and
so
I witnessed it.
Are you seriously saying to us, Mr. Yentob, that you as chairman and the other trustees have no responsibility for the failure of this charity? You made no misjudgments?
No, I'm not saying that. I
Well,
don't
then
think
what were the
you didn't
misjudgments
ask me
you
that
made? 'Cause
question.
this isn't an accusation. It's
Yeah.
just, let's have the honesty, which I think you are perfectly capable of and want to be perfectly straightforward and
I
honest.
think I have been.
What are the
straightforward.
mistakes in retrospect that you should not have made, and isn't actually putting more professional management in place of Miss Batman-Gelly at a much earlier stage? Wouldn't that have been a sensible step? Given that turned into the point of contention with the government.
I believe that that at the point that we were at in 2014, when things were going well, the problems that arose made it very difficult to make changes of that kind.
Every one of your sets of accounts talks about the fragility and precariousness of your funding.
There is,
and the inability to build up reserves.
Every
one of your accounts says, in fact, you downgrade the priority about building up reserves from an objective to as resources allow. Always other matters were taking priority over the long-term stability of the charity. Why was that the case?
Okay, let me answer your question. First of all, the words about the audit reports during these years were audit reports for all these years were unqualified. I want to repeat that in March of 2014, which is when our problems were beginning, I read to you what that audit said about both the work that Kids Company was doing. It was endorsed by Michael Gove and others. Nick Hurd came into the Cabinet Office.
Talking about your role as a trustee for the financial stability of the charity.
Yes, right. First of all, I'm saying to you that the demand was such that it was difficult to say no. We tried to contain it, but that was difficult. So we did two things to deal with it. We kept reserves of a sort, but not enough. But by 2013, we had already had an asset, which is in a building called the Heart Yard, which was worth 1.7 million. So we decided that because restricted funding was so difficult, that we would try to find assets in other ways. At the same time, what we did is discuss with government, and you've seen the correspondence with the Prime Minister, and with Nick Hurd, and with Oliver Letwin, getting a greater proportion of statutory funding, which would be... Well, I'm trying to say what responsibilities we took. if you're saying, do I have regrets? Yes, I wish we'd started restructuring earlier. I wish we had not assumed or hoped that government would give us more funding. They put two civil servants.
Earlier?
Sorry?
Why didn't you restructure? There were you had trustees who wanted you to restructure earlier.
Who were these? Well, when you say we had, all the trustees were agreed about how we managed the organisation.
Well, I accept they could accept collective responsibilities. Well, there was discussion amongst your trustees at a much earlier date about restructuring. And
there was discussion
continuously.
There was continued discussion about
why did you leave it so late?
Well, if you're asking me, if we left it 6 months, because, I'll tell you why, because we believed that the government was going to give us more money. And if you look at the correspondence, and I don't want to blame government.
We'll come to that. I reckon that there is a fair debate to have about that. One sentence. One sentence?
No, because actually, I would like to ask you on what basis you've decided that this is a failing charity. Because if it's on the basis, bust. No, hold on. No, I think it's very important because there are two separate issues here. One is, please allow me to speak, because I'm questioning your premise.
First of all, I ask the questions.
Yeah.
Secondly, your question is on a premise.
It's your responsibility to ask the right questions.
Well, okay, I will do my best. But this charity did fail.
Yes, and I would like to answer to that.
That is why I'm asking these questions. That's why we're here.
I would like to be given the time to address that issue, because right now
it's not a criticism of your.
No, you need to give me a chance.
I will give you one sentence.
Okay.
We have other questions to ask.
Basically, the reason the charity closed was the sexual abuse allegations that were unfounded. The charity did not close because it was badly run. Numerous independent evaluations have confirmed that the charity is well run. You're holding your evidence on the basis of the Daily Mail and a group of other media providers. You don't have, and you haven't done, the rigorous research that is required in order to be able to determine whether the charity and its structures were failing.
I've given you the opportunity to say what you wanted. Mr. Flynn.
Delighted to be accused of being a friend of the Daily Mail. It's a novel experience. Mr. Yentl, you have a very busy life. You, between 2002 and 2015, you held 4 very important roles: the chair of the trustees of Kids Company, editor and presenter of Imagine, BBC creative director and chairman of the ICA. How do you ensure that these positions you had adequate amounts of your time and didn't introduce conflicts of interest?
Well, first of all, I don't think there were any conflicts of interest, and they were all declared. Secondly, I would look at the work that I did, the programs I made, my role as creative director, ask my various director generals whether I had actually delivered or not delivered on that basis. So I think we can put the BBC work to one side, and I'm sure they would have ended my service if it wasn't up to scratch in their view. In terms of Kids Company, there were different times when that responsibility was greater. I believe that people who have got the resource and the ability should make a contribution to public life. That's what I've always believed. My only regret, my great regret and sadness, is that we perhaps tried to look after too many children and we tried to do too much. Okay. And I'm not saying that I don't take responsibility for that. I would say, though, that and this is important, in terms of sort of what happened in the last year when I did spend a great deal of time, I managed to bring in Hogan Lovells, insolvency lawyers, KPMG, who will all talk to you about how we conducted this. Deutsche Bank, we moved out of our premises into Deutsche Bank. All this was done pro bono. I communicated in a very straightforward manner with the Cabinet Office. They were very rigorous. David Cameron is not in my pocket, and actually it's clear that in the difficulties that were faced, they could no longer give us direct funding. I believe, Chairman, and as you said, maybe we expected we would get this funding. And we did, because of the correspondence that went on. And that's another of my mistakes, but I did believe that.
Is it true that you accompanied Ms. Bangladesh on her interview for the Today programme, the Radio 4 programme, and that you rang
Newsnight and the World at One before items about Kids Company were broadcast?
All right. Well, Newsnight was the first.
Well,
is it true?
Yes or no?
I'd like to go on to the real question.
Well, what do you mean?
Are those things
well, no,
true?
but the implication you're
Could you
making.
answer yes or no?
Well, just answer
I,
yes or no, and then we can get on.
Did
to
I
the real
accompany Camilla as chairman of the Kids Company when they had asked me
the,
to be on the programme myself? Did I accompany her to the Today programme? Yes, I did. And I said,
okay.
I can't be on it, but Camilla Batman-Jalid will come. I am the chairman of Kids Company, as you're all making it clear to me now.
But you accompanied on the Today programme, and you positioned yourself with the producer in the box, which is something that
I was not with the, no, I'm sorry, I don't know where you heard that. I was not with the producer in the box. I was she was being interviewed, I was outside.
Why the BBC never interviewed you?
The BBC have never interviewed me simply because from the beginning we thought there might be a conflict of interest, and because the newspapers wanted to make a great number of it, I decided that I would actually do an interview with Channel 4 News at the time and not compromise anyone in the BBC. As you may know, the BBC anyway loves to have an executive to have a go at, so it's not something that they won't get the opportunity.
Do you
to
think
do.
your presence, as you're there in your capacity with Kids Company, but you're also one of the most senior people in the BBC. And was your intention to put pressure on the interviewers to go easy on Mr. Batman-Jalid?
If you know anything about the BBC...
I do. Yes.
Yeah, you do.
Well,
you know that when I've been interviewed on Newsnight anywhere else, I'm given a harder time than any of you guys are. So, the execution there are a number of Director Generals by their own staff is history. So
but do you think it's right to, with such a senior position, that there wasn't a conflict in that, and your presence and your phone calls were an abuse of your position as a senior member of the BBC?
I absolutely think that's completely untrue. No.
There are members of BBC staff who disagree.
Well, I think
there's certain unhappiness being expressed while you put your hands up. But would you, in hindsight, think it's right for somebody who's regarded as one of the 3 or 4 most powerful people on the BBC to be around, be ringing people up, to influence their way they're handling the Kids Company interviews?
The only thing I did, and the only phone call I made, I made 2 phone calls. I have been phoned, perfectly rightly, no one... This story has been the BBC story, and that is the right of BBC News to do that, absolutely, and they've run it. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to get over-embroiled in it. I made 1 phone call because as chairman of an organisation that I believed in, and which I had disclosed very much that I was running, not for no one and none of the trustees to have known this was going on, that there was going to be a programme. It was 9 o'clock at night, and I rang and asked, are you going to be on it? And I said, well, why can't you do it tomorrow? I don't even know what the allegations are. That's the conversation I had. Since then, other journalists have spoken to me and have rung me up continuously. And I've tried to speak to people, but I wanted to wait. You'll notice that I've done 2 interviews, one with Channel 4 News and a short one with the Evening Standard before we broke. I've done no others until actually yesterday. And the reason I haven't is the reason I haven't is because I wanted to come and speak to you first and take the responsibility that I have and talk to a public body who also had a responsibility. I didn't want to get involved with lots of people talking about it.
Have you considered your position at the BBC as a result of your behaviour and your attempt to influence their coverage of this?
You say, in no way did I intend to influence or put pressure. I know perfectly well that BBC News, over which I have no control, is not going to listen to me, and you only have to look at the number of BBC journalists out there interrogating this case and this organisation to know that that is the case. I'm sorry.
You mentioned...
Order. Mr. Jones.
Are you entirely happy that you've been able to separate your roles as chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Kids Company on the one hand and a senior BBC executive on the other?
Can I say, I'm entirely happy because my concerns are all to do with the same ones of you, which is the future of these children, what happened to the charity. This is the issue of the BBC and my life in the BBC and my responsibilities are entirely separate from this.
Do you think it was proper for you, therefore, to devote an entire issue of Imagine to the work of Kids Company?
It was not an entire issue of Imagine. It was an Imagine which was... first of all, it's 20 years since I've been involved with Kids Company. That's one programme. Kids Company has had lots of programmes done about it by ITV, by Channel 4, by Sky, by every organisation. This was a story which came from one of my team who proposed that this would be a story about children and art therapy. And as a consequence of Kids Company having done an exhibition just recently, which was at the Royal Academy, it's had two exhibitions, major exhibitions at the Royal Academy, one major exhibition at the Tate Modern, and I think you would get many endorsements from the head of the Royal Academy and the head of the Tate. So at that point, they said, can we do this programme? I discussed it with the BBC's editorial policy, and we decided that it wasn't a programme about Kids Company, but it was a programme about child and art therapy. We agreed that it would be made on the basis that I would declare my position as a trustee, and that there would be an executive producer who would look across it to see there was no conflict of interest. That's what we did. I went through a process, and that's how that programme came about. It couldn't have been more transparently done.
Moving on.
Final question. You alienated a long list of ministers who supported Kids Company. There's a feeling that they did this, including the Prime Minister, to advance the stunt they were running at the time called the Big Society, which appears to be dead and buried now. These voices appear to be silent now, the ones who supported you then. Do you think they use Kids Company to advance their political agenda and run away from you now?
I absolutely don't, no. I don't think they're running away particularly. I think that, the Prime Minister, Oliver Letwin, Nick Hurd, people like this, these are difficult times. And the issue of the care system, and I think everyone would know, Howie knows more than anyone, how difficult, how challenging it is. And I think they're genuine in their views that they want to do something about it. At the same time, the speed of change is very slow. We have found in Kids Company that the children that we look after are still not necessarily cared for by the statutory system. I didn't send it to you, but I have to say that every time we have challenged a local authority about care for children, and we've gone to judicial review, we've never lost. So it's not good and bad on both sides. Everyone is trying to do their best they can in the most difficult circumstances.
Moving on, Mr. Jones.
Yes. So just
briefly, Cheryl Gillen.
I don't mind. Well, I just had a last question, because in one of the annual reports you celebrate this flat management structure, and I'd like an answer from both of you on it. And you reflect that there's a very open channel of communication between employees and trustees. But some of the trustees have been reported to have said that they weren't aware of some of the serious allegations that have been made recently about both the administration and events occurring within the charity. And some of those, some employees, I understand, have also resigned after their concerns about the charity's finances were not considered or taken seriously. Now, if what was said in the annual report was right, why were so many serious issues not acted upon, and why did some employees resign?
I mean, first of all, the Charity Commission has, the PwC investigated some of these allegations. I put it down in the report. 4 out of the 7. The other 2 that were outstanding, one of them was actually about trading while insolvent, which I believe very clearly we have taken a responsible view of and will not be cleared. It was only after that the government took the decision, having seen that they were unsubstantiated, to go ahead and put the money in the bank for Kids Company. Not an easy decision to take. So I would say that these so-called serious allegations, even the one that went to the PwC, it depends what you consider to be serious. And I would say, if you're asking me, was I approached and told not just we're living in insecure times and why don't we cut back and do things like that, but actually these are allegations. There was one that came, not allegation, but one complaint to me, which was about the appointment of someone who was going to be appointed who didn't have what this person thought were appropriate qualifications. I talked to Camilla about it. Camilla listened, agreed, and that did not happen. That was the only complaint that ever came to me. And I would also say, and I need to repeat this, that this issue about data, and even with Southwark getting stuff, I'm very sympathetic, and I would like to see anything that legally is possible to go to Southwark and to Lambeth and anyone else. But clinical workers who work with these kids are very protective of this clinical data, because these kids misbehave. It's a chaotic world. They could get into trouble.
So you have fellow trustees that perhaps have not told the truth?
No, they have. In fact, the two fellow trustees summoned two of these so-called whistleblowers. And there is, by the way, a whistleblowing... inside the risk assessment, there is a clear whistleblowing process which was not taken. And is it right? So yes, they did talk and asked, and they did not get a proper answer. They summoned these two people.
I want to move on to the relationship with government, because obviously that was a very strong determining factor in how you made decisions about the charity. But just before we do so, you have denied. I just want to put this, make sure we've absolutely got this right. You have denied that you were in the cubicle of one of the programs that you visited with Camilla. You didn't stand
where
in the
I
cubicle.
was. I was not. Camilla was behind the glass in another room. I was on the other side of the glass. Yes, but I was not in the cubicle where she was being interviewed.
No. This is the point. Excuse me. Order. The allegation is that you weren't in the studio with her.
No.
But you were the other side of the glass with the producer.
Yes, I was. Yes.
Well,
I think
that inhibited the producer. That was the whole point.
Well, the producer wasn't doing the interview.
I think you gave me a very misleading
I misunderstood.
Okay, it has been remarked to me that for such a senior and interested figure from the BBC to stand beside the producer, so that the producer is thinking what I say to whoever is interviewing the interviewee is going to be heard by a very senior figure who has a conflict of interest in this matter. Don't you think that was...
Well, they invited him in.
Can I put in perspective? They invited me to be on the programme. And I said, well, I'll bring Camilla.
Then you should behave more like a guest rather than as a...
Well, I think, in all of this, you do have to understand that for all these years, I've been there to support these children. I have disclosed my position. No, I don't think it was. I'm not a particularly...
In retrospect, was it really appropriate for you to go and stand behind the producer so you could hear what he was telling you?
I didn't stand behind the producer. Well, you see, you see it differently. I just thought I was there to listen to what Camilla said, and this is an organisation that I'm familiar with. So
but
perhaps,
in retrospect, was it a...
Well, if it was intimidating, I regret it. Put it that way. Yes.
I think that's a good thing to have put on the record.
Yes, I thought your answer was probably inadvertently misleading.
The
whole point I was making. Do you think that you're standing there as one of the most senior people in the BBC? You've got a producer that's junior to you there. You've got somebody interviewing within sight of what you're doing. Of course, they'd be inhibited in what they say with you peering.
I did ask
pressure, and it's quite inappropriate.
With respect, I think Mr. Yentop has said in retrospect that he accepts that.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, and I did. And even, let me just explain that even in relation to all of this, I did, remember I was being run after by people all the time. I was worried about Kids Company. I was emotionally upset.
I don't envy the pressure
and engaged by it. So, and actually, there was another person who's outside now running after me, and she asked me to appear, and I said, well, why should I appear? And maybe I raised it, and I wrote to her, and I said, look, I'm sorry if I got upset. And so it's not, I'd like to in these circumstances, with the events of the last few months, I've tried, that's why I haven't appeared on the BBC, I've tried my very best to support both the charity and the BBC, which I love. Okay.
I'm very anxious to let you have your say, and I thank you for your candour that you now regret that perhaps lapse of judgment, and I think that's quite important. I'd like to move on to the relationship with government.
Yes, and Mr. Yentop, would you say that it was fair to say that Kids Company enjoyed a privileged relationship with government as compared to other charities?
Do you know something? I don't really think that's fair or true. The reason being that for a long time, governments, various governments, and it's all governments, by the way, it's whether it was the Labour government under Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or whatever, have always felt and always seen that there was a real value in Kids Company as an agency for change. I mean, there is the care system and it sits there and everybody knows what it is, but here was an approach which was different. And I think they all acknowledged that. And over time, and I mean this quite seriously, there was no senior minister who took an interest in this area who didn't think that actually Kids Company was entitled to more statutory funding. They really did. And so consequently, I don't think we were indulged. And if I come to the end of the story and the narrative, where I go and see Oliver Letwin in December, and he says to me, we are not going to be able to give you any more money other than this year is going to be the last, when we have been expecting, and they have sent 2 civil servants for a year to sit in Kids Company to find us statutory funding. When they say, we're not going to give you anything, and this is what, when you ask me, what do I regret? I regret that I didn't get this message earlier, because I don't think, and here you may be right, that they quite wanted to tell us that directly. And so in the end, the £3 million was simply saying, let's get you out of our hair, because we have lots of other demands on us, which we have to listen to. The welfare system is a challenge and problematic. And therefore, if you're going to bring people in who will fund this, if you never ask us again for a direct grant, we will give you £3 million and you will be out of our hair. The money came from philanthropists, the other £3.5 million came, they investigated the allegations, and then lo and behold, on the day that the money went into the bank, and I had, I believe, as the chair, helped to save the charity and rebuild it, stay on the board, but have Stuart Roden and 4 significant philanthropists who understood the work to be there, and then an allegation which I believe has got no... I can't believe it at all.
Mr. Gentle, can we come to that a bit later?
Okay.
I'd like to go back to the earliest stages of your relationship with Kids Company back in 2002.
Yeah.
And in your, in fact, one of your first roles as at Kids
I wasn't
Company,
chair at that time.
No, indeed, this was before you were the chairman. And one of your first roles in relation to Kids Company was actually intervening with government. And you said in your memorandum to us, in 2002, Peter Wheeler and I, with the support of Peter DeHaan and Michael Hastings, approached the Treasury with a request to help to address an outstanding debt to HMRC of £700,000. Despite the recent allegations in the Mail on Sunday that I had sent a secret letter to Dawn Primarolo, that letter was completely transparent. How was it transparent? Did you publish it?
Can I just ask you, can you not use words like intervention? I wrote a letter. There were people in government and in the Treasury who knew the work that Kids Company was doing.
Forgive me, I understand that. What I'm asking you is, how was that letter transparent, as you allege? Was it
because
published?
It wasn't a secret letter. It was a letter written. What is a secret letter? A secret letter was what the Daily Mail called it. I would not call it.
So how was it transparent?
Because it was a letter written to a government minister which didn't say you're not allowed to show this to anybody else.
Did you refer to it in the report of Kids Company that year?
Well, first of all, 2002, I can't quite, I'll have to recall whether we did or didn't refer to it. We didn't try to hide the fact that we had got support from government. There were many people who knew. Michael Hastings was someone who knew and admired the work of Kids Company. There were other people in the Treasury who did. And at this stage, we must remember, we had no money from government. We were reliant only on funding, on charitable donations. And it was at this point that I decided that we needed to bring in a proper board of trustees, and I decided to take part and to become chair.
But the then government, the then Labour government, actually waived £600,000 worth of that debt. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, but why? They did it because they clearly thought there was a case for supporting a charity which was doing work which others didn't do.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So really, very early in your association with Kids Company, you knew that there were severe financial problems in that institution.
I wouldn't put it like that. I would say that there was
being unable to pay £700,000.
Can I explain what happened?
Tax. No, this is Mr.
Okay,
Yenko,
what? Sorry.
Eviction.
Yeah, there were certain things going on. We were in Southwark for that period under a place called The Arches, which is where I'd first discovered what Camilla had done and where Richard Curtis and Comic Relief had been supporting Kids Company during this period and other people. When later, very soon, they were going to be evicted. So that again became a problem because we had to find somewhere else, or they had to find somewhere else. I wasn't a trustee at the time. As a consequence also of the demand increasing, it was late, the payments, the tax payments which were due were late being paid. When we discovered this, I brought in Peter de Haan, who is a philanthropist, Saga, as you know, and Peter Wheeler and I, who had also been putting money in, we'd all been putting money in as we could, and I have over the years put £250,000 in. I know everyone will say, oh, he's so bloody well paid, he should be able to put even more than that in, but nevertheless. Every trustee supported financially as much as they could the organisation. So at that point, we had to talk to government because we were not eligible for statutory funding, and they agreed that they would help us through this, and in future they scrutinised Kids Company very carefully. David Blunkett came in and gave us £350,000 in the Home Office with Louise Casey's support, and we were looking after troubled families as she is now, and then consequently the Labour government and then the coalition government came in and continued to give us support.
I understand that, and
well, I'm trying to tell you.
I fully understand.
Can I help you with that question?
No, forgive me. I'm asking Mr. Yentl. The fact of the matter is, though, and I think it's fair to say that your first encounter, just before becoming chairman of the board of trustees with Kids Company, is when they have a severe financial problem. £600,000 is rather a lot of money.
You must have worked in charities. You must have even asked Kate. Can they do the work they really need to do?
Lots of charities locally who've gotten very, very little money and very little support from government.
Sure.
They did wonderful work.
Yes. Well, I think we do wonderful work, and the answer is that I was not the chair and the board of Kids Company for the next 12, 13 years. Kids Company was audited properly, raised funds and did extremely well, so it wasn't badly managed.
Well, may I stop you there, please, Mr. Yentl? I mean, you're quite right that that Kids Company was audited every year. But for very many of those years, you were reporting annually that you had difficulty in maintaining an adequate level of reserve. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, except that in recent years when that was a problem, the cash flow was always difficult to predict because that is the way it worked. But
sorry, explain that. Why is it?
It was difficult to predict because we were not getting much a proportion of statutory funding for Kids Company over this whole era was 22%.
Yes.
That is not significant compared to the demand that we were facing.
And the demand was great.
Yes.
So, did you think, as chairman of the board of trustees, that it was prudent to carry on maintaining the level of support that you were giving to children? And I realise it calls for a hard decision. That you were, if this was a business, and of course it is a business.
Yeah.
Isn't it your duty as chairman of the board of trustees to ensure that you have adequate resources in terms of both income and reserves to maintain the level of service that you want to provide?
I think you're misrepresenting this extremely badly. Let's be absolutely clear. Until 2014, there were no question about the financial resilience of Kids Company.
But there were, clearly, because...
No, I'm sorry.
Because
forgive me. Contribute to this question, because there's a big piece of missing information.
This is a question to Mr...
No, let me...
Sorry, order.
But can I just strike quietly to...
Order. Mr. Jones is cross-examining Mr. Yentl. Please don't interrupt.
The fact is, Mr. Yentl, that year on year you were reporting your concerns about inadequate reserves. That's correct, isn't it?
No, the inadequate reserves problem really was coming up much later, not in those early years. In those early years, we were trying to get more statutory funding, but there was no question about our ability at that time, even though the cash flow was in terms of what many businesses might expect, was not as consistent or as clear as some, it always did deliver, and that's why we had a monthly finance meeting, that's why we interrogated the cash flow. She would have to predict the cash flow, and she always delivered it. So all I want to say to you is, yes, from 2014 onwards, we did have problems. There's no question, and there were issues around reserves. Up to that point, for all those years when I was chairing it, from 2003 until 2014, It was well run, well managed. In very difficult circumstances, we raised the funds.
You were becoming increasingly reliant upon government money, weren't you?
No,
Please.
quite the opposite. I mean,
Is
we
that
were
right?
becoming increasingly reliant
because
on
in
money
the early
from the
days,
private
you said
sector.
there was no funding, but you were regularly approaching government for money, weren't you?
Yeah, look, yes, can I explain? The money that came from government started at around $1 million a year or something like that at the very beginning in 2003-04. It went, because they saw the need for that provision, to around 3 million, and then it finally, for a long time, it was around 4 to 4.2 million. The rest of the money raised in the latter years was around 20 million from the private sector. We made it clear to government when things were getting tricky, and Camilla did, and I think this is one of the reasons we had problems, that we could no longer continue to rely in these difficult times and financial circumstances on private funding and foundations and individuals, and that therefore we needed to tap into statutory funding to which we believed we were entitled to a greater proportion of statutory funding. We got the feeling from the correspondence you've seen with the Cabinet Office and others, and Oliver Letwin, the Prime Minister, that they also believed we should be entitled to more and that we should be a sustainable charity. But unfortunately, because of the difficult times and the challenges facing government, they were not able to secure it. Therefore, at the very end of the story, they decided that because we had brought in these philanthropists who have incidentally set up another charity to look after some of Kids Company's clients, that they would give us this last chance. And even the Prime Minister, outside Number 10, said on that day, this was an inspirational charity, this was the last chance, and I'm afraid this allegation of sexual misconduct has made it impossible for this to work.
Would you say, Mr. Yentop, that you had privileged access to ministers in both the Labour and coalition governments and latterly the Conservative government?
What I would say is, first of all, I didn't see them that much. It was actually Camilla seeing them.
I mean you corporately.
No, but what I would say is that as a chair of a charity, you have a responsibility to, you want a chair who's got good connections, who can actually, both in terms of the arts world and other things, which I'm very proud of what we managed to do there, and relationships and things, that they will be heard when you want to make your argument. It doesn't mean we were indulged. I mean, if you really look at this, we were for years being told we would get more statutory funding. When we went to court to challenge people, we did get it, but when we went to government, we got the same amount year after year, and then they said to us, you should be lucky to get this amount, because others, quite rightly, aren't getting it. And so we got to a situation where we were told finally in December, you're not getting any more money after this year, you're going to have to find a new way forward. And that's when we started to restructure, and unfortunately, as you say, if I have a regret, it was too late. I wish we hadn't, and maybe Camilla, she may not acknowledge this, believe that they would necessarily give us the money.
Even listening to you now, I mean, you said that your accounts sort of vindicated your position in every year, and I'm just looking at a summary of your accounts. You had a deficit in your free reserves in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2009, and 2010 and 2011.
When you say a deficit in our reserves,
your free reserves.
Yes, but we had other assets, and we were not at that time.
I am involved with other charities. Perhaps I should declare that as an interest.
Yeah.
And
has your charity lasted 20 years?
My charity's been going for about 400 years. Actually.
And how many of those? You look younger than that, I must say.
But the point is, in order to manage the risk of the operations effectively, you have to look at how much cash has got to go out the door to pay people like employees, and you've got to have some months' cover.
I've told you about the calibre, Mr. Chairman, I've told you about the calibre of the trustees on Kids Company. I've told you about the amount of times that the Finance Committee would work and the energy that went into fundraising, and that for all those years, I'm admitting completely and utterly that from 2014 on, the top of 2014, after that audit, we were in trouble, but before that we managed.
The financial fragility of the whole model of operating was evident throughout almost the entire period you were chairman.
The financial fragility was to do with the demand from very, very vulnerable children and young people who were not being looked after by others. And yes, there was a balance to be struck between looking after those children, responding to that need which was not being dealt with.
But that was putting the short term ahead of the long term interests of the charity and failing in one of your statutory duties.
I'm sorry, I don't see it like that, because I believe that we during that period we were not seriously challenged in terms of being able at the end of the year to deliver. We had, as said, unpredictable cash flows, but I'm afraid I don't accept that, and I have to say that in the end, this is partly about money.
Existence. I mean, lots of charities do live a hand-to-mouth existence, but a charity involved with such responsibilities and employing so many people, was it really sensible to live such a hand-to-mouth existence?
Well, do you know, there was not one...
Order, I'm asking Mr. Yentop the question.
Order!
There was not...
I don't know that shouting is going to get me to behave any better.
Order.
There was never an issue about whether or not we delivered on what we promised to deliver in terms of clinical care and other things. So the fact is that I believe we did act responsibly, and when things got difficult, we should have acted earlier, perhaps. That's absolutely true. But I don't believe you can look across the record of those years and say that this charity was not run properly. Do you know how many corporate endorsements, how many banks looked at the work we did, how much they supported us? And there were philanthropists who at the end, and this is exactly what happened, would say, do you need £1 million? I'll give it you. And that is what people like Stuart and others did. It's what I did myself in a different way. So we always believed that if it came to it, we could manage, but finally we did have to own up to the fact that if government was not able to give us direct grants or address the statutory problem, then we would have to have a different model, which is what I tried to achieve with Stuart and John Frieda.
Mr. Jones, do you want to come in on this topic?
Yeah, if I can, Chair. It's in relation to the reserves and financial sort of situation. Under Mr. Yentop, under your leadership, both the ICA and Kids Company suffered financial difficulties. Understanding in 2010 the ICA came quite close. It was £750,000 of debt, and clearly Kids Company would know the situation there. My understanding is both organisations have been sort of criticised for an over-reliance on short-term grants, short-term funding. Could you please sort of describe what lessons you learned from one to the other?
Yes. What I learned from, first of all, the ICA, we sorted the ICA out. In other words, that when I left, it was on an even keel. And what happened then, and you could never win, is that the issue with the ICA was that it was a time, just at the time of the recession beginning, there was a big auction, there was an estimate for how much would be achieved, and it wasn't achieved. As a consequence of that, we went anyway into a restructure. That was agreed before the auction had happened, that we were going to cut down in size. We had the support of the Arts Council and other funders, and we went ahead and did it, and I stepped down from that role. I suppose you could say, well, maybe the timeliness of that wasn't matched by the timeliness of Kids Company, and the challenges here were much greater and much less predictable. So I think I've explained that in the end, on July, it was only on the very day or days before we folded that you could have said we had to restructure the organisation. But why would Oliver Letwin, the Prime Minister, take the decision to support Kids Company in that way if it wasn't, first of all, a financial value, because we were going to be, and Stuart and these others would be looking after children who would otherwise perhaps not be looked after. And once they'd done that, we'd not have to pay any more money. So I think I wasn't indulged, and Kids Company was not indulged. Camilla was busy telling everybody that the care system needed to be addressed, the system needed to be changed. Many prominent people agreed with her and still do. If you read David Cameron's speech the other day, he as well sees the problem and has always seen it. And I think that's right. I mean, we're here in a society where we have to find ways where we deliver value for money. And early intervention is what when I've ever had a conversation with Minister, I've always said the really important thing is early intervention. And the Department of Education, the schools, somewhere to go. I believe passionately that that is the way to address this system in the long term.
But in terms of the sort of short-term reliance, I suppose, and it brings me on to the question in terms of reserves and the reserves policy. There's clear sort of guidance from the Charity Commission in terms of having a proper reserves policy. And I understand from after 2011, Kids Company's annual report stopped referencing specific reserve targets. But a quote from the report says that the charity aspires to build up reserves when circumstances allow. Could I ask how seriously the issue of the low reserves was taken by the trustees?
Very, very seriously indeed. And when we to actually say we're going to acknowledge the Charity Commission's recommendation, but if you are dealing with incredibly serious problems, which we were in Bristol, if that expansion, and here I have said, again, Camilla may not agree with this, but I did say at one point, well, maybe we shouldn't have expanded to Bristol. And I had a host of our staff from Bristol saying, what do you mean not expand to Bristol? Do you realise the problems that you've uncovered in Bristol which needed to be addressed? And maybe they won't be addressed by us, but they will be addressed by others now. So as those costs went on, and we had to very seriously consider whether we could afford that. And what we then did was we had a reserve in 2012, you've seen, of 1.33 million. But with restricted funding the way it is, people don't want you just to put the money in the bank. And as I said, we started then to think of properties as assets. And we got this property called the Heart Yard, which is valued at 1.7 million. And that was, some years ago. And that would have been an asset, which even now will have to be discussed with the official receiver.
Did you have any specific guidance from the Charities Commission or any regulatory activity with regards to the issue of reserves?
We didn't, because I think the Charity Commission saw us as being a very successful charity, and when problems arose, we were talking to the Charity Commission, but by then we were discussing with government what we could do and being as honest as we could about the worries we had about fundraising going forward. And we couldn't have been more honest. You've seen all the correspondence, and I'm not even blaming government for it, but the trouble is that we had a year talking about this, and it followed, a year in which I don't want to go on about it, but the Enough is Enough report, and many people agreed, as do people today. You heard from Peter Wanless, the head of NSPCC, about 1 in 5 children with mental problems are not being tackled. You heard from the social workers saying that 1,000 social workers, a significant proportion of them said that they had diminished the child protection from child need. In other words, that because of a lack of funds, there's a kind of sense in which we're saying, well, these problems, we can't afford to pay for these problems, so they don't exist. Well, they do exist.
The point is, we were constantly talking to government about coming and actually looking at the statutory caseload that Kids Company was carrying, because I believe, and the board believed, that we shouldn't be carrying this caseload. The point was that we couldn't get the right level of help for these children, young people and vulnerable families. The last discussion I had with the Cabinet Office, I actually submitted a paper asking them to get KPMG to come and look at the statutory cases we had and economically model it. The problem, for example, in relation to 2003 and why David Blunkett intervened and why we had our staff taxes written off was because Southwark at that time was evicting us from the railway arches. We had 400 of the most vulnerable children and young people aged under 18. There was no other provision being provided for them, and funders rightly became very anxious about whether Kids Company would exist. So they didn't put the funding in, and that's why government intervened at that point and David Blunkett intervened. And I think what's really important to understand is we have repeatedly had conversations with various prime ministers and government departments saying Kids Company should not be carrying this sort of caseload, you need to come and help us, and you need to find alternative provisions for them, because we want to build reserves.
Just a minute, but there is a fundamental flaw in that logic, which is you have said yourself today that the reason why the Director of Social Services in Southwark has picked up few cases is because they're only interested in the statutory cases. So why was a £23 million business only dealing with some 1,600 statutory cases?
No, I dispute that, Chair, and I've said that to you.
So you think there's far more?
It's much, much more. And what I actually want, because I think...
But isn't that the heart of the disagreement within government? Well, I may just ask the question. Isn't that the heart of the disagreement within government, which is what I want to get to? Is that some people in government seem to think you're right, but generally, in the end, they decided you're not right.
Basically, no one has come to actually do a comprehensive audit.
Well, you've been running this business for 23...
You asked me a question, you must allow me to answer it.
I will.
No one has come to do an audit of the statutory caseload we were carrying. That is precisely what I had repeatedly asked different government departments to come and do, because a charity should not have been holding cases like that. I have letters from mental health providers locally who are statutory agencies who were redirecting their patients to us without paying, and I have a letter from a major NHS trust who was banning a really disturbed client because the client was too violent. The client is a care leaver. The client is still with us. I'd gone to the Quality Care Commission to ask for this client to be picked up. I'd gone to the Minister of Health to ask for this client to be picked up. In the passover to the local authorities, I'd asked for this client to be picked up. And this client is still in conditions of exceptional risk and not picked up. If you want fairness, get an independent person to come and review our cases, because what has been going on is a lot of unsatisfactory spin.
In your view, David Quirk Thornton is not objective, not independent, cannot be relied upon.
I would like somebody objective of local authorities and central government, because the essence of the problem is the collusion between the two in hiding the real scale of the problem, and that's why we're sitting here.
Kate first, please.
Very quickly, you talk about the £700,000 of employee contributions, which then was which you should have been passing on to the inland revenue. Well, it wasn't passed on to the inland revenue. The bill was dropped. What happened to that money? Did it go back to the employees?
No, that was conceptualised. It was actually...
Sorry, I don't understand the word conceptualised.
Yeah, let me finish. The Labour government decided that that should be seen as a contribution to ensure the survival
Did the employees all know that their money that they'd paid in tax was not actually going to the government?
Yeah, the employees knew. The employees were fully aware all the time of all the challenges we faced. We were always transparent.
Very interesting.
Mr. Yedel?
Yes. Yes, I mean, I don't... The point was that the government decided that the Treasury decided that the responsibility for the work that Kids Company was doing, that a proportion of it should be taken on by government, and that the challenges of not having a place to be and these children sitting there couldn't be sustainable. And they then, David Blunkett then came in with Louise Casey and said, we need to give more attention to this problem. And from then on, we were in conversations with government, and they decided to help fund Kids Company going forward.
But there's just a quick thing. Ms. Angelish, you just gave a list of people you approached, and the whole of this session seems to be littered with the name-dropping of ministers' names in all directions.
I didn't name-drop anything.
But for me, as a constituency MP, if there was an individual that you wanted taking up by statutory services, the first line of approach I would have thought was to write to the MP. Did you actually write to the MPs of those individuals or get their permission or suggest that they approached their MP to try and get that help?
We have raised the alarm in various ways. This case that I'm describing to you, we've been raising the alarm in relation to this case since this child was 15 years old.
Okay, I just wanted the reassurance that the Member of Parliament is fully aware of it.
Would you like to give us the details of this case in confidence?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, what I would welcome is a scrutiny of this file, because it epitomizes the challenges we faced and the fact that cases were not being picked up. And I absolutely want this done, because in the spirit of fairness and detail, we should do this.
And you can assure me that the Member of Parliament of this individual is approached.
Because it's such a long time, I don't know. I believe we did in the early days.
Kate
but
Harry.
it got to a point.
Kate Harry.
Would that person be one of the adults that's on this list of 25?
The top paid
people?
I don't know what list you have, but at one stage she was.
Well, I've got a list of 25 top payments made in 2013, January to December 14 and January to December 13, and they're all very, very high, 73,000, 59,000, 50,000, 40,000, 30, goes on and on and on.
Yes,
and I'm
she
trying
was
to
on
ask,
that
was
list
any
at
of
one
that
point
to pay anyone's mortgage? Would any of that be used ever to pay anybody's mortgage?
Kate, I don't know what list you have, and I'm not at liberty to discuss individual cases in this situation, but I'm happy to answer any question about any of the cases.
The question is, did you ever pay money from the charity to pay somebody's mortgage?
I'm not able to answer.
Sorry, it's quite a simple question. Mr. Yantov.
Can I, because I don't know the details of
I'm
this
happy
case.
to answer the questions in private.
Let me just answer the question in principle, that if you look at the annual report, it is absolutely true that Kids Company did provide for homeless people and others. It did provide, places for them to stay, and that's where some of this money went.
Long-term help. Some of these people may have been being helped for, I don't know, 10, 20 years after they've been.
You need to come. That's exactly what I want.
I would like.
You can answer a general question
Yes.
about a principle. Is it possible that money was paid to pay somebody's mortgage?
I would like to
say... Is it yes or no?
The answer
is it yes or no?
The answer to that question is, there is one case, and I would like to discuss it. It was someone who had a stroke,
and
I would like to discuss it separately.
Is it true the charity was supporting one or more individuals who was actually living overseas? That's been...
Again, not in the long term, no.
So it has had a yes in the short term?
As a transition, yes.
Yeah.
As a transition, yes, we did, because that was the responsible thing to do in the case of a young person who had no parents, had mental health difficulties, and didn't have any relatives in the country to which they were deported. It was the right thing to do to see a proper and orderly transition. That's the clinically right thing to do. And much of this debate is about clinical appropriateness versus financial choices. And if you want to know what the essence of the problem is that Kids Company had to make choices that related to clinical safety when it would have probably been easier for it not to do that. But we couldn't abandon the children and young people who were in our care, who were being failed by other agencies. And this is
who would have
the
made
sort of
that
discussion.
Decision? Who would have made the
we
decision?
would have made that decision as an entire team, trustees and us together. Did you think I enjoyed having to fundraise every night and work till about 11 o'clock at night? And I worked 7 days a week. I didn't enjoy that kind of pressure. I was under that kind of pressure because we were trying to hold these children and young people and vulnerable individuals safe with the promises that repeated prime ministers and government ministers were taking of resolving this difficulty that we were experiencing. If I actually produce all my letters to prime ministers and prime ministers' letters back to me and ministers' letters back, the number of times they promised that they would solve the fact that we didn't have statutory funding that matched the level of need that was arriving at our door. In 19 years, we didn't receive 1 pence of local authority funding or mental health funding for the cases that we had in our care. And that is why we had to turn to central government for exceptional grants, because there was a problem with the structure. This country has not understood that children will self-refer.
You've made that point before.
No, Childline didn't survive for exactly the same reason. And actually, the NSPCC had to absorb it We have a structure in this country where children and young people, when they self-refer for help, there is no commissioning agent paying for that. That's a flawed structure, not in Kids Company. It's in the structures of care that are upheld within the country, and we have to address that.
Right, Mr. Jones.
Yes, Mr. Yentob, could I talk to you about the last sum of money, the final £3 million that was paid?
Yeah.
Which you will recall was paid on the direction of ministers contrary to the advice of officials.
Yes.
That payment, you say in your memorandum to us, was made on the 30th of July.
Yeah.
Now that payment was subject to a number of very clear conditions.
Yeah.
You actually paid out of that money, you tell us, the sum of approximately £880,000 to staff for their salaries.
Yeah. Let me be absolutely...
Sorry, can I finish the question?
Yes, sure. Finish the question.
That payment, it would appear on the face of the agreement, was contrary to the conditions that were applied by the government. But you say in your memo that you informed the Cabinet Office that some of the money would be required for that purpose. Did the Cabinet Office agree that the money should be applied for that purpose?
Yes.
Did they?
They did.
I think
they knew.
They
because
knew.
Actually, as a build-up to getting that £3 million grant, the whole structure of negotiations between us and the Cabinet Office was about restructuring. And as part of that, it was payments of all our self-employed, catching up with what we had to pay in terms of our businesses and redundancies, and part of that was salaries. And the deal was 3 million from government, 3 million from the philanthropists, and I was supposed to raise 8 million plus. I fell short by 350, and I put my flat up as a surety, which the Cabinet Office took, and that formed part of a whole package.
The Cabinet Office took your flat as a surety?
Yes, because we were
Surely
short.
not.
Yes, I had to submit the papers because they wanted absolute confirmation of the amounts of money that was being raised to see this deal through.
So you're saying your flat was put by way of security?
No, I actually signed a letter saying that if I didn't raise the remaining 350, that I would sell my flat and they could have the money. That is how much rigour went into putting this package together. And if you actually review the papers, you will see that paying staff salaries was part of it. And in fact, there was an email.
No, please, can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Who actually authorised within Kids Company the payment of that last set of salaries, that 880,000?
The authorisation came really essentially, it wasn't strictly my authorisation because the deputy chair was responsible for those things. I make no apology for that. And
so you authorised the payment?
The trustees authorised the payment.
The trustees corporately?
Can I answer the question? Because it's a sort of slightly an accusatory thing, as if we're squandering money.
Not at all. I'm just
I want to explain. It's very important. First of all, remember that myself and Stuart Lipton and John Frieda and others had given our significant sums of money ourselves, by the way, more than the 880,000, much more than the 880,000. Secondly, there was I want to say that the people who were dealing with us at the Cabinet Office and Oliver Letwin, took risks in doing this, but we were very clear and simple with them. We said we have got a problem. We've got to pay this month's salary, and we need the payroll to be paid. Oliver Letwin was in China at the time. We made them know this. The money went in. Hours later, there was a challenge about the BBC announced that there was a question about sexual mismanagement. It became very clear to me at that point that it would not be possible not to avoid insolvency. I want to repeat, Hogan Lovells, KPMG, Deutsche Bank, for weeks and months, I had 400 email exchanges, and we said, in grave sorrow, we can't do this. Now, the other thing I did is
before we leave the point about the salary, please,
yeah.
Mr. Yentop.
There was an email.
Forgive me. Who authorised the payment of salary on that day?
I think I'm not. I don't know if I'm being clear. I said to you, the trustees.
The trustees corporately did.
Of course we ought. Yes, I'm not apologising.
Wasn't that contrary to the wording of the agreement?
No. Actually, there's an email from the restructuring person, Colin Webb, to Helen Taberner in the Cabinet Office that says, we need the money to pay the salaries.
Is there
so
an
it was
agreement?
Absolutely clear. At no point did she get back and say this money's not for the salaries.
So the Cabinet Office were notified that
yes.
money was to be applied for that
yes.
purpose,
yes.
but the Cabinet Office didn't come back and say yes, we agree to that.
They didn't say no. They sent the money.
The money had already.
Would you allow me to answer? This all happened at very short notice. It's very important, this, because can you imagine the stress for us of dealing with this? The money arrived. We had already had a month, because of the allegations going on, because we had to go to the PwC and pay them £50,000 to tell us that there wasn't much substance in the allegations, and therefore the Cabinet Office should go ahead and give us some money. So we had to find another 1.7 million. So in other words, the challenge of the mortgage and all these things became much greater because we had another month's salary. At that time, there was a real honesty between us and the Cabinet Office. It kept forensic interrogation of the figures and the pledges, which is why, I'm not sure of the detail, but that extra money of Camilla's, we have got the money, we're not giving you the money unless you can guarantee it. At that point, they put the money in the bank. An hour and a half later, there was an allegation, and I think this could only have come from leaks in some place, an allegation of sexual misconduct, and I believed it was quite impossible to carry on doing this, nor did I want the philanthropists to put their money into something which is going to insolvent when they could set up another charity and look after those children, which they are doing. Right?
Sorry, I just want to stop with that. You say leaks from in some place.
I don't know where it was leaked from. Well, you know that the email you're talking about, the Cabinet Office email, which came in which I said that there was the risk assessment form, that was the restructuring agreement. That went to only my trustees and the Cabinet Office.
So do you think the allegations of sexual misconduct, which we can't discuss in any detail, but you think those came from some malicious source?
I do, yes.
Some civil servants have been absolutely brilliant. Some civil servants have been absolutely brilliant. They've been extraordinary people with huge commitment. But some civil servants have been absolutely malicious and unprofessional and have behaved in ways that isn't respectful of a democracy. And you need to look into this. Some of the civil servants who briefed against us have never had any dealings with Kids Company.
So you think they briefed against Kids Company?
Let me.
I'm asking.
I would not like to make accusations without evidence, but what I would like to say to you, I would like to say to you.
You have by implication made quite a serious accusation.
I would like to say to you that take the evidence, which is civil servants commenting on Kids Company in the media when they have never visited us or had any dealings with us.
Well, if you have evidence of that, we would like to have it.
I will produce those for you.
And you think that includes the allegations of sexual...
No, I don't.
I don't think it includes... I do think it is very suspicious for the timing at which our grant arrives in our account and these allegations arrive. Only our finance person and the Cabinet Office knew that the money had hit our account. And suddenly, out of the blue, we get allegations that we don't even know relate to sexual abuse. So the police called us and said, their allegations, come in tomorrow and we will explain to you what they are. And within hours, it was all over the BBC and news outlets that these related to allegedly sexual abuse against children by Kids Company. That was the kiss of death for a charity dealing with children.
You clearly believe that if it wasn't your own financial officer, it was somebody in the Cabinet Office.
No.
Look, I'm just saying to you that I have incredible nervousness about the type of briefings that have been flying around between government and elements of the media. And I think this is something that needs to be looked into more robustly, because I think that the democracy of this country is compromised by behaviours like this.
Have you anything to add, Mr.
Yes, I just want to put it in perspective. I've just explained, certainly the sexual allegation didn't come from anywhere near the Cabinet Office, but it came from a source which obviously wanted to damage Kids Company. Remember, this sexual allegation was 2007 or something. And as a consequence of that, which I do not believe will be substantiated at all, there's not even evidence to me whether it was on the premises, between young people. Apparently, in the House of Lords, appears.
I would invite you not to discuss.
I won't, because I don't know, to be honest with you, what it is, because they've been very strict, the police. They haven't really told us very much. But all I would say is that there are documents, like this document I mentioned, which was leaked. I want to also say, you know, that there were issues, things in the newspapers that I read about stuff which didn't come from me. So I don't know how that letter, I don't know how that got out. So what I'm saying is that the Cabinet Office and the people we were dealing with were very responsible, very challenging, and wouldn't let things rest. But there are other people, clearly, there were documents leaked, one way or another, and I don't know where they came from, so I can't make any allegations about that.
Sorry, just Mr. Dowden, and then I'll come back to Ms. Jones, and then we'll just draw to a close.
It's only very briefly this issue of the security. The charity of which you are chairman of trustees has an income in 2013, according to the latest figures we have, of £23 million.
Yeah.
Do you not think that being in a situation where you're having to have your chief executive providing her flat for security in order to obtain a government grant reflects poorly on the financial management of the organisation of which you have ultimate oversight?
Look, I think we spent the whole of this period talking about a challenging moment. That is Camilla's. The question is, how much reserve do you need? How much demand do you have to make? I'm not sure about that detail about the apartment at all. The question is...
President, the fact that you're chairman, but not aware of this, I'm just struggling to think of another charity of a similar size that would find itself in the situation where its chief executive would be offering her property as surety in order to obtain a government grant. Surely you must accept that reflects in some way on corporate governance structures of this organisation.
You're talking...
They were exceptional circumstances.
Camilla didn't have to do this. It was not a matter of... It's not money... It's a question of security and assurances. This is not something that detail I did not get involved in at that time. I have to say that was an attempt to suggest that this process with government was one which was not responsibly handled. I'm trying to tell you that the question of the examination, interrogation of our books, what the pledges were, a lot of this is about pledges. Do you have the pledges? Can you guarantee those pledges? Has that person signed? In other words, the way that we did this at this point was very, very responsible. Now, why would KPMG, who were on top of this and who supported this process right the way through, or Hogan Lovells or Deutsche Bank or any of these people who were closely involved in these negotiations? So I sort of slightly...
Just one more to go on this.
Yes.
Do you accept that it is highly irregular for a charity of this size, £23 million worth of income, to have its chief executive offering her own personal property as surety in order to obtain a government grant? And secondly, if that is the case, do you not accept it reflects in some way on the corporate governance structures that you have in place in that charity, for which you are ultimately responsible as the chairman of the trustees?
Can I say, let me answer the question, okay? The bid, really, Camilla is talking about the money that she felt could be secured ultimately, which would provide a reserve as well. The figure that we were talking about, and which is in that agreement, is not that 8 million, it is actually 10 million. That is what the government required. The issue really was it's not really for the government this, it was for us ensuring that there would be a reserve in due course. And this was a conversation which was going on between some of the finance people. The fact is that the 10 million that was required to pay for the redundancies, to pay the wage bill, and to get the place moving into the next stage with a new board was actually the 10 million. So it is not, this is a bit of a distraction.
Can I just explain? We started the year Yeah.
Mr. Turner.
I would like to help answer this.
I think your chairman has answered the question.
I was between 1999 and 2001 employee as Deputy Director of Education Policy and Resources of Southwark Education Department when I met Mrs. Batman-Jella, although I have no financial interest. I just wanted to follow up with these numbers, particularly for staff. Is this figure correct, that in 2013 you had got an equivalent full-time of 496 staff?
Okay, yes, but the way the staffing was that we had paid staff on the payroll, we had self-employed, and then we had 500 trainees who came from a variety of universities to do their work experience with Kids Company. So social work trainees, psychotherapy trainees, and then we had 300 mentors, and we had 10 to 11,000 volunteers a year. So everyone worked with the kids. Above 95% of the staff were directly working with the kids.
Sorry, that figure was?
Above 95%.
Above 95%.
Of the staff were directly working with the kids.
Is that those who are paid or those who are both paid and non-paid?
Both paid and unpaid. Well, the unpaid people, the 500 trainees, were all working with the kids. So we'd get a social work student, and that social work student would be with us, let's say, 4 days a week, and they would have cases, but we were not paying them.
No, but I take it those people were responsible to someone.
Yes, they had.
So that was a paid member of staff.
They were responsible not only to. We had practice teachers inside the organisation, but also their universities provided practice teachers. So if you get a social work student, their university supervised them, their practice teacher supervised them, and internally our team also looked after them.
So the figure of 496 is...
It's about 650 staff.
650 staff?
Yeah.
Sorry, of which those were... let me try it again. I've lost it now, but it would... yes, that's what I'm going to ask.
I'd be very happy to give you all the detail.
Could you do so, but particularly, how many locations were you working at? Most recently?
We were all together working from 58 different sites across Bristol, London, so we were all over the local authorities, different local authorities, and Liverpool. And in addition to that, we had an outreach team that went out to the estates and worked with the most high-risk cases actually on the estates.
If you could let us have
I'll
those
give you a
figures,
complete breakdown of everything.
Mr. Jones.
Yes. Two brief questions for Mr. Yentop. The first one by way of clarification of this issue of payment of salary. Did the reports of the allegations of sexual abuse reach the trustees before or after? After.
Absolutely.
So by that stage, you'd already authorised the payment of salary. You mentioned, again in your helpful memo, that you ring-fenced £2.1 million.
Yes.
Has that been returned to the government?
Yes. So I do think, in terms of responsible governance, which is why I keep talking about Hogan Lovells and KPMG and the amount of, and also that these are people who did this pro bono and believed in what they were doing and looked at the books and were part of all the negotiations. The fact is that to ring-fence that 2.1 million was quite difficult for us because the self-employed had not been paid. They'd been left. So that the truth is that I wanted to behave as responsibly as I could, and so did the trustees, in relation to what the government had done. They stuck their neck out, they tried to give us a last chance, but we knew that if we were to end up with insolvency, the government and the official receiver must decide what happens to that money. So we ring-fenced it. So it was all this in terms of extra government money, and I sort of, it went to people who were looking after children and who continued, by the way, a lot of these people unpaid are continuing to look after these children.
As a trustee, what evidence did you have that the government approved of this breach of the conditions?
There was no breach.
There is no question that completely in good faith, I had conversations myself with the cabinet office, making it clear that we at this stage needed to pay the payroll. That was part of the overall redundancy agreement and the restructuring agreement. It was part of the model. It was costed on that basis, and it was part of that cash.
Because a little earlier, Ms. McGuelly, you said that you sent an email saying that this is what the money was going to be used for. Is that correct?
Yes, Colin Whip, who was the restructuring person, actually wrote to the Cabinet Office basically saying, can you hurry up because we're waiting for the salaries to be paid.
Well, actually, this is what he said, because a BBC journalist,
this money,
a BBC journalist has just tweeted this email. It said, payroll has not been paid yesterday/today, and we face closure if we can't get this agreed. CEO approval will allow SR to put his 3 million in too. We face closure tomorrow if we cannot secure funding by tomorrow morning. I appreciate this is extremely late, but there have been many moving parts here today, and it is the facts we face tonight.
That is not the email that I'm mentioning. That may have been an email that he's actually sent generally, but that is not the email.
So can you produce the other email?
Yes. Well, the official receiver will have to give me access to the data.
I'm sure you can get it.
We can produce it,
Okay. I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah.
There's another email.
Because the date of the email he sent should be around the 30th.
Well, that is...
This is the 28th of July.
It'll be later.
This is not the email.
Right. Okay.
I do want to repeat the good faith issue.
Even
when the government said what they said, the fact that we managed to, there could be people in the insolvency world who say, they said they put that money in, you don't need to. But the deal was quite clearly one which said, well, we've got to be a solvent organisation.
I'm glad we've settled that, and I personally don't doubt your good faith, either of you.
And on that point, if I may, Mr. Yentov, I've been very impressed during this evidence session that you have invested a huge amount into this organisation over the years, financially, in terms of time, and I would suggest, most importantly, emotionally. And the question I really want to ask you is this. It was clear over the years that this organisation was always operating on a knife edge financially. There were never enough reserves. You were always having to struggle for finance. Do you think, in retrospect, that perhaps your emotional attachment to this organisation actually blinded you to the fact that really you should no longer have been chairing it and somebody else should have been?
I don't know if I could quite... listen, I think emotional attachment is one thing, but I think you should credit me with a bit of competence as well. I have managed to manage a very easy chief executive, as you could see, who's very easy to manage, and to keep the place afloat. And the thing that I'm not someone who has simply sat in an office looking at the charts and the money. I've also looked at and seen the work. I've met the children. I know what's going on. I know what a difficult world it is. And so, as a consequence of that, I suppose I believe that if I moved out and destabilised the organisation at the moment which I thought it could happen, and also someone has to, you ask me what I do, well, Camilla does listen to me, so we can have arguments just like you've had, quite a lot of them, and in the end, we come to a resolution which is in the interest of the organisation. So if I had been able to do it earlier, by the time it came to the right time to do it, which is why I had to say, I said to Camilla, this is the right step, we need to move forward, you need to change, and she wanted to change. We all had to band together. Who else would have brought in, other than our trustees, Hogan, how could we have brought in these organisations pro bono for weeks on end, supporters, if there weren't a leadership that they trusted and believed in? So to get through this, and we did get through it. And when you talk about government, I believe that the Cabinet Office trusted me, and they trusted Stuart Roden, and they believed that we would deliver what we promised. They understood we'd learnt the lessons, and I have learnt the lessons, certainly. The restructure was really downsizing to 10 million, and then it could grow. And these new trustees would take it into another era, acknowledge that government in these difficult times couldn't afford to fund it the way it had. Yes, it was a grave disappointment to me. But the final answer to your question is, over 20 years, the numbers of children whose lives we've changed, sent to university, transformed their lives, I don't regret that. I just regret that we hadn't responded earlier to the challenges and had a sort of realisation that it couldn't carry on like this, because actually government was living in tricky times, the recession was very difficult. Why would they favour us more than they would favour others?
Which was my point.
Well,
maybe somebody else would have made that judgment.
I don't know that. I don't think. Stuart Roden didn't even want me to step down. Stuart felt that I was essential to the stability of the organisation and actually to the negotiation with government. But I felt that he needed to take over, and he understood that, but I would stand back and support him. So I am sort of acknowledging it, but I'm trying to give you a bigger sense of
what would we have done to the children and young people who were left with us? It's very easy to talk about downsizing a charity in a vacuum. Actually, the stress here is the fact that we couldn't shrink the organisation because of the caseload we were left with, and that was precisely, if you look at my letters to various prime ministers,
in the world,
that was precisely the problem. Not all charities are carrying this sort of caseload. I'm sorry.
There are hundreds of thousands of charities.
Well, they're getting paid for it. We were not getting paid for it.
But can I get a sense of, just to be clear, lots of charities have folded. This charity would not have folded, albeit it had to reduce itself and get a reality check. It would not have folded unless allegations of sexual abuse, malicious allegations which were disproved about financial mismanagement. I'm sorry, but the governance here, is not easily challenged given the dependencies that we had. So all I would say is a lot of charities get in trouble. I don't believe I could have done more, but I do see how I could be, the regrets that I have.
We carried the government's troubles.
I understand. You've said that many times, and I think we've taken that on board, that that's your view. I just want to clear up one thing, because you're absolutely adamant that there must have been another email.
Yes.
Because I'm being told that the email I quoted from was an email that Kids Company gave for publication precisely because it was the email which you said authorised the release of the money for the payroll.
I recollect there being a much shorter email.
This is a very short email.
Well, I don't know unless I have a look at it, but the email that went to the Cabinet Office, as far as I remember, and I am at a disadvantage here because I don't have the paperwork.
Right. So you might not have remembered correctly.
What I remember, and which is what I've shared with you, is an email went from Colin Whipp to the Cabinet Office saying you need to make this payment. We're waiting for your payment so that we can do the staff salaries.
Well, that's exactly the email I read to you.
Your email had more.
Sorry?
What I recollect is there was an email that went to the Cabinet Office that said that you need to make the payment as soon as possible because we need to pay the staff.
Email. That's the one I quoted from. I don't think there was another email.
I don't know if that's the one, and I would like the opportunity to get our IT people to go through the emails and find the one that I had in mind.
Could I come back to the good faith issue?
Mm-hmm. In any event, you can tell that the staff salaries and the payment of the self-employed were included in the arrangements with the Cabinet Office by looking at the financial papers that we submitted between us. It wasn't hidden.
The good faith issue is this, that I think there were people in the Cabinet Office, and I imagine in Number 10, who knew that the way we operated and weigh the...
Yeah, but they might have been the ones advising for you not to have the extra payment.
I don't know who they were. There were obviously different sections there. But what I'm saying is that we had very civilised negotiations and conversations on the phone the whole time. I certainly would be saying to those people I was talking to, we've got to pay this thing. We paid it on the understanding that everything was fine, that we are moving ahead. There'd been endless negotiations, and then this bolt from the blue came out. And that is, I keep repeating, it's what the Prime Minister said outside number 10, when all those groups of kids came outside number 10 on that day. He said, we wanted to do it, this is what floored it. Now, the 800, I've paid my share towards that, and it's a significant part of the extra money, and so has Stuart Roden, John Frieda, many of these generous people who kept the place going and kept the children looked after for all that time. So I'm sorry that this tragedy has happened and that these children, many of them, are now abandoned. And I believe that Stuart's new charity will make some step changes, but I hope it was a legacy.
I was going to ask about this new charity. What do you think is going to be different about this new charity?
Oh, I think it's going to be... First of all, I don't think it can be of the scale and size that we've talked about, because Camilla's ability to both fundraise and to identify the problems are significant. What I hope...
So, Ms. Batman, you're still going to be central to this new charity?
No, this is not to do with Camilla.
Would you like me to be, or would you like me not to be?
I was just asking you. If the answer is no, you're not going to be involved.
John Frieda and Stuart Roden and their friends have structured a charity that is going to take elements of Kids Company's work that actually are likely to cost much less and therefore are easier to manage, and they will do a brilliant job with it. Yeah. What we are left with is still the bit that no one wants to talk about, which is the catastrophically abandoned children and young people who are surviving the ghettos of Britain that no one wants to really deal with, you know. And it's very telling that we've had very little conversation about these children. When we closed and when they were being dragged through the media in such an unsavoury way, I did not see one MP, one local authority representative come and say that what is happening to these vulnerable young people who are being doorstopped all the time is not right. There was a vacuum of leadership yet again in relation to the most vulnerable kids, and their problems remain unresolved, and no one wants to take that on because it's not going to make them look successful.
Well, as I was going to give her the last word. But
yeah, I think
it's a very brief question.
That's very kind of you.
Can be answered with a single word. Mrs. Joan Woolard was a 78-year-old widow, sold her home, so the Spectator reported, and gave the proceeds, £200,000, to the charity. After volunteering at the charity, she became disillusioned and asked for her money back. Has it been returned?
No, can I answer that question? And it's very glad you asked that question. I could show you emails, limericks, abusive limericks sent by that lady. I could also show you the Charity Commission's review of the costings and the challenge that she made, which unequivocally say that it's untrue. The Sunday Times were brought in, the deputy editor and the chief financial officer, to come and look at the books and to see and look at the receipts. And this is the thing, and see what was done. They have sent a letter, which I can send you, which says, we unequivocally do not see any evidence that this is true. And as a consequence of that...
It's not true that she made a contribution.
It's true she made a contribution, and actually, she's actually quite fragile, and we understand that, and rather sympathetic. But the abusive limericks which followed, the fact that she was saying she wasn't thanked when we've seen all the thank yous, the fact that this money was spent on the children, and that has been authenticated. That is the kind of thing we've had.
The Joan Woolard story was not true.
Again, it's a yes or no. She gave us some money.
Yes.
Did she ask for it to be returned? Have you returned it?
No.
Actually, I need to answer that question. Joan Woolard gave a donation. We behaved entirely appropriately in relation to that donation. The Charities Commission confirmed that. The Charities Commission advised us not to return her money, and we followed all the instructions that the Charities Commission gave us all along, because the story that was written in The Spectator was entirely untrue. And when we went to The Spectator to present the evidence that actually Joan Woolard had been thanked numerously, that she'd had a whole page in our newsletter thanking her, that every receipt and expenditure was accounted for, she had a full report submitted to her. We did everything absolutely correctly in relation to Joan Woolard. And when we presented the evidence to The Spectator, they didn't want to print the correction.
And does the Charity Commission know all that?
Yes, absolutely. There are emails I can share with you where the Charity Commission confirm that there are no issues in relation
yes would
to
have done.
this case.
This is a fragile 78-year-old lady who's come up against all the might of your organisation. And don't you think you had a moral obligation to return it if she became disillusioned with your work?
I'm so sorry, but if we were to rely on donations that are given to us, and then someone changes their mind, it would make for a very precarious contract.
I think it's a good
between a
warning
charity and
yes, I think
no, that is very unfair. We behaved entirely appropriately in relation to Joan Woolard, and I think we'll draw a line there. The evidence.
Okay, we'll draw a line there, and we will ask the Charity Commission about the treatment of Joan Woolard and find out for ourselves.
That would be great.
I want to thank you both for coming in front of the committee today. I appreciate you both being under a great deal of stress and public scrutiny, and I hope that we will draw some positive lessons from this episode. Order, order.
Thank you.